there was ever a fitting episode for that introduction, it is tonight. This is, of course, the Hagmann Hagmann Report for today. It is Monday, July 28th, 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me in studio is my co-host, my son, fellow investigator Joe Hagmann. Together, you're about to hear an incredible program, folks. 3 hours of incredible programming. Our very special guest tonight is an author, is a former police detective, and as someone I haven't told him this yet, but who is someone that I've got something in common with in a very personal way, to the extent that, something he wrote about in his book that my son found, and I had found as well, and it's something that I'm willing to lead off the program with him about this. It's an interesting case. It's a small world indeed, folks. At any rate, you're listening to the only show, folks, where the news is presented to you in 3D. We look well beyond the headlines and bylines and bring you the news behind the news. And this is just one of those times. For new listeners, thanks for checking in with us over the weekend. We got so many emails over the weekend from the UK, from actually a couple from Spain. I'm not exactly sure. Well, apparently word's getting around. And, of course, all across the United States, Canada, and even South America. I want to welcome you to the only show that gives you the news in 3D. And, of course, our home base on the Internet. We've got two now, folks. HomelandSecurityUS.com, that's where the articles are, the reports, investigative reports, that's HomelandSecurityUS.com. And we have now, folks, go to HagmannandHagmann.com. That's HagmannandHagmann.com. Bookmark that site. We have resurrected that site. There you can link to us live streaming. Also our to-date current guests, as well as past guests, which have to be retrofitted into the archive there. Folks, we broadcast, like I said, each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. We're simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network there. Tune us in at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. You have to spell that all out. Now, having said that, first of all, Joe, welcome to the studio.
Glad to be here. Got a very interesting show. Author John Cameron is with us, and
Joe, you're muffled,
and you sound muffled to me too. So yeah, I'm not sure what that's about. Any better?
No, not at all. It's interesting how things go.
Look, and we even upgraded our Skype accounts to have the best, top-notch Skype service, and it seems like it just got worse. I don't know. I'll see if I can do anything to help it along here.
Well, in the meantime, I just want to let's see. Hold on, just 1 second here. This is live radio. It's fine.
The audience says it sounds fine. So if you can handle my muffledness, I'll handle your delays. We can keep going.
Okay. Hold on, just 1 second here. If you can bump me.
All right. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, folks, does this sound any better?
That sounds better to me. Am I still muffled?
Yeah, you are, but that's fine. All right. We apologize for the audio problems, ladies and gentlemen. It seems like they plague us every now and again. Our very special guest tonight is Mr. John A. Cameron, Detective John Cameron. He is the author of a book called It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. Now, what we're about to talk about tonight, folks, is going to just absolutely blow your mind. I hope it does. And I got to tell you something. I received John's book, I think it was the end of last week or on Saturday, I think it was, early Saturday morning. And I've been going through his book, and he makes a very compelling case. What case, you ask? Well, it's a case about how Edward Wayne Edwards, here's a guy you never heard of, how he killed hundreds of innocent victims over a 66-year murderous career. and was never caught. And you never heard of the guy. Well, maybe you happened to see him on To Tell the Truth, or perhaps you might have picked up a book that he had written, or attended a church Bible study, or whatever. But his victims, according to Mr. Cameron, now folks, buckle in and get ready for this. His victims included such well-known cases as, are you ready for this? Chandra Levy. That's right. The Atlanta child killings. Remember Dr. Shepard's wife back in the 50s? The movie that The Fugitive was based on, Marilyn Shepard, Stephanie Bryan, and the Black Delilah. He was the famous Zodiac killer who left a trail of murder near San Francisco in the 70s. He killed dozens of couples parked on lovers' lanes for decades. He brutally murdered 2 sets of 3 boys in Chicago and in West Memphis, Arkansas, almost 40 years apart. He was responsible for the murders of hitchhiking teenagers along Highway 101 in California, the Colonial Parkway in Virginia in the 70s and in the 80s, and posing as Santa Claus. Now get ready for this. In 1996, he groomed his way into the very pretty 6-year-old young John Benet Ramsey's life in Boulder, Colorado, and set up her parents, John and Patsy, for her murder. And 40 years earlier in Berkeley, California, he staged a similar kidnapping of a 14-year-old girl there. I could go on and will go on as the program unfolds tonight, but we're very, 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 very honored to have with us Detective John A. Cameron. His website, folks, and you can spend a lot of time there, is Cold Case Cameron. It's linked off of HomelandSecurityUS.com, and it's also linked off of HagmannHagmann.com. With that, Detective Cameron, welcome to the Hagmann Hagmann Report.
Thank you very much for having me on. After that introduction, I hope people will stay on and not think I'm completely nuts. But I just happened to be in a right position in 2010 to meet the worst serial killer there has ever been, and nobody's really ever heard of him because he was really never investigated after his capture in 2010. And so I just happened to be in the right position working in Deer Lodge Prison, Montana for the parole board in 2010, and having the experience of being a retired cold case detective for Great Falls Police 24 years, I got introduced to Mr. Edward Wayne Edwards at the age of 77 years old in 2010.
All right.
I'm sorry about that. There was a delay there. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We're still suffering through these audio problems. So, well, let me start off by saying this. And folks, again, our guest tonight is John A. Cameron, former detective, Great Falls, Montana. Wrote a book called It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the Serial Killer You Never Heard Of. Again, John A. Cameron, coldcasecameron.com is his website. But I've got to tell you something, John. And I'm going to start out with this, and then we'll back up and we'll look at the bigger picture here. But in your book, and this is something that absolutely blew my mind when I found this out. On page 185 of your book, you talk about a case that took place in Erie, Pennsylvania. And that case, I don't know whether you're familiar with that or recall that. I mean, you talk about a lot of cases, so in the event it doesn't sound familiar, it was almost anecdotal to the book, but Edwards had been killing children and staging horrific murders his entire life. Now, this is after his 1982 capture in Atlanta. He started informing to officials. He contacted investigators in my hometown in Erie, Pennsylvania, looking for a deal and a way out of prison. He had information on an arson that he had committed, but wanted to set someone else up for it. Now, that sentence there just absolutely jumped right off the page at me. The arson resulted in the death of 2 children. He confessed to doing the crime in the poem, which you actually have included in your book. I'm not going to read it, but from the excerpt. One night, 2 kids got killed in a fire. I struck the match, so the death toll is higher. In his typical fashion, he pinned the whole deal on someone else. Again, that sentence just jumped right out at me. Edward convinced investigators to go after Louis DiNicola for the August 30th, 1979 arson at the residence of Deborah Sweet. That killed her 2 children and an adult man. Is this ringing any bells with what I'm saying, Detective Camera?
Yes, I did quite an extensive research on that case because that was the public case that was put out on the internet that showed me that Edwards was actually an informant prior to me knowing the extent of what his informing had done. But it was the Debbie Sweet case where the 2 little kids and the adult male were killed in a fire in 1979 that Edwards provided the testimony in 1983 and got that man convicted and eventually overturned. And Edwards was sued for giving false information. And so all of that was out on the internet, and that really started the essence of what Edwards' MO was when he killed people, is he would make sure that he had somebody else to pin it on. And so he would plan his murders deliberately to know that the police would go after somebody obvious. And it worked many times. In the DiNicola case in Erie, Pennsylvania in 79 was the one that really started unraveling his MO.
Well, it's interesting because at the time, for those unfamiliar, obviously there are people, the majority of people would be unfamiliar with this, but I attended a book signing, a police officer, a veteran police officer here in my hometown, investigating organized crime, 185 solid convictions without any, well, actually there was one, his biggest case that he lost, but he wrote a book called The Unholy Murder of Ash Wednesday. This was actually a memoir of his investigation into the murder of mob wannabe Frank Bolo Dogashaw. Well, in his book, and again, I would consider him a friend of mine. He's a police detective turned judge, district court judge, and then, of course, turned author. And he writes about actually going after DiNicola. And Tom Ridge at the time worked in the district attorney's department, and had to recuse himself from the case. This case was a really screwed up mess from the start. But the bottom line here is within 14 years after DiNicola's conviction, and then I'm going to back up here and shut up. We can start from the beginning, but this is where I come in. I've been an investigator in the private sector since 1985. It was right after it was during that early time in my career when I was retained by the defense to look into this case. And looking into it, there was absolutely no forensic evidence whatsoever to convict DiNicola to the crime. Yet a jury, because, Frank Serpico showed up here in town. It was a big deal. And a jury convicted DiNicola. But the bottom line is, 14 years after his conviction, absent of any forensic evidence, and I apologize, that's when Serpico showed up. The conviction was overturned and DiNicola was actually released. And the reason I brought that up, aside from the personal aspect of this, because getting into this case was just something that this really woke me up in a large way, that there were a lot of innocent people in prison. I had never before really understood how somebody like your serial killer, Edward Wayne Edwards, had the ability to actually set up, or the I don't even know what you'd call it, the methodology of setting other people up. I mean, you know, people set others up for the crime, but we're talking on a wholesale level. So I just wanted to bring that point out and kind of let the audience know that this is our conversation tonight. And I didn't mention this to you before. I just found this out here as I was going through your book, but it really hit home with me, John. It was just blew my mind when I heard about this. But anyway, we can start from the beginning. Edward Wayne Edwards. Let's just start from the beginning. How did you get involved in this? Who is this guy?
Well, let me give you a little background on me, and then I'll tell you kind of how I came about meeting Mr. Edwards in 2010. I live in Great Falls, Montana, which is dead center of Montana. It's a city of about 80,000 people. I was a police officer here for 24 years, from 1981 until 2005. And I specialized in investigations of cold cases. There were quite a few unsolved cold cases here in Great Falls. And Great Falls, Montana is also a hideout for serial killers. The Unabomber was hiding just west of here. Nathan Barjona, a child cannibal, was hiding here. And this killer, Edward Wayne Edwards, was actually in Great Falls, Montana in 1956. I wasn't even born then. But in 2010, Mr. Edwards finally got caught for his first murder in Wisconsin, and he was 76 years old. What had happened is his daughter, who was 41 years old in 2009, was watching a cold case on TV regarding a Lover's Lane couple that were kidnapped, stabbed, tied up, and tortured in Wisconsin in August of 1980. And she recalled, when she was about 10 or 11, her father taking her to a scene similar to the one she was watching on TV. And so she picked up the phone and called the police and said, I think you need to talk to my father, because we were living in Jefferson, Wisconsin in August of 1980 at that campground when that couple disappeared. And it was then that began the unraveling of Edward Wayne Edwards at the age of 76. He had never been caught for murder, but he'd been caught for burglary, robbery, kidnapping, arson, impersonating an officer, his whole life from 1945 until 1968. And in 1968, he came out of prison at the age of 35, claiming that he is no longer a criminal, that he is a reformed family man. And what it ended up being was a ruse. He had actually started killing in 1945 in Chicago and didn't get caught until 2010 in Wisconsin. And in between, he killed in every state, everywhere, while he traveled the country proclaiming to be a married family man with 5 children, 11 grandchildren. And it was really just all a ruse. He used his family as an alibi while he would hold them up in campgrounds and states and then kill in the neighboring state and then move to another state and do the same thing. And he did this type of thing his whole life.
This is amazing. By the way, earlier today I was talking with a police detective who I'm friends with here in the township in which I live. And I said, have you ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Edward Wayne Edwards? And Frank, if you're listening, you should be. I just want to say hello to you. Detective Sergeant Frank, I'll just stop there. He's active in the cold case squad here in the Western Pennsylvania, attached to the Attorney General's office. So he's listening also for anything that might be relevant to what he's looking into. But having said that, I asked him if he had ever heard of Edward Wayne Edwards. He said, no, I haven't. I said, you're going to have to listen to tonight, because this guy really traveled the country, and this is what you're saying, under the pretext of being a family man and, of course, being a church-going Christian, loving person. But he is evil incarnate. I mean, I've never seen such evil or read such evil in my life than within the pages of your book in terms of what this guy had done. It's incredible. How can he go 66 years? I'm sorry. How is this even possible? Because we're looking at, and I'd like to get into the larger picture too of maybe accomplices and what motivates him. And I mean, we've got really 3 hours here to really explore this. So I'd like you to take your time and just kind of let's really get into this. So I'm going to follow your lead, but I was just absolutely amazed at how this guy could walk the earth, do what he did, frame others for what he had done, and get away with it.
Yeah, let me explain kind of how he did get away with it, because it is rather incredible. He was always standing in front of us, and that was one reason why he got away with it, because he was just never suspected. But Mr. Edwards, by 2010, at the age of 76, went to the press and started confessing to murders in order to get his execution in 2010. And he confessed to 4 murders, first off, that were couples parked in their cars making out, who had been approached by Edwards, kidnapped, tortured, tied up, shot, stabbed, raped, beat. He did everything to his victims. And that case kind of unraveled what he really was. By the time he was 76 years old, he finally gets identified as a killer, and he confesses to 4 killings right away, trying to get his execution. And then he finds out that he can't get his execution on those 4 killings because the Supreme Court had put a hold on it for the years the murders happened. And the years the murder happened are important. One of them was 1977 in Ohio, and one of them was 1980 in Wisconsin. Both of them lovers' lanes, parked in their cars. He confesses them, trying to get his execution. And when he finds out he can't, he confesses to luring a 22-year-old Army man into his home, making him change his name, putting insurance, $250,000 on him, waiting 2 years, and then luring him to a cemetery and killing him, beheading him, and holding on to his body for about a year before he finally plants it to be found and collects the money. So in 2010, he confesses to 5 total murders to try to get his execution, and he finally gets it for the beheading of that man in 1996 in Ohio. But what nobody knew prior to all of this is that Mr. Edwards had written a book when he was 35 years old. And this book ended up being the most important piece of Mr. Edwards' murder puzzle that he did his whole life. The book was titled Metamorphosis of a Criminal, The True Life Story of Ed Edwards. It was written in 1967, just after he got out of Leavenworth prison, and married his wife in 1968. She helped him write it. And the book mentioned my hometown in it, Great Falls, Montana. And so when Edwards finally got identified as a killer in 2010, and the fact that he had written a book, and he had been confessing to killing lovers on lovers' lanes, a memo went out, and I received it in June of 2010 when I was working at the Deer Lodge prison on the analyst. And that memo said that if you had Edwards in your hometown, you may want to check into double murders, unsolved double murders that he may have done, because he was confessing to these double lovers' lanes murders. Well, I had a 1956 New Year's unsolved lovers' lane murder in my hometown of Great Falls, Montana. And that case ended up becoming so important. What had happened is around January 2nd of 1956, a 16-year-old girl and her 18-year-old airman boyfriend were parked on the banks of the Sun River here in Great Falls, making out when they were approached by someone appearing to be a cop. And he made the girl tie up the boy with his belt, and then he put the boy on his knees and executed him with 2 shots to the head in front of the girl. Then he took the girl, terrorized her, took her to the top of Mount Royal Hill here in Great Falls, put her on her knees and executed her. And it was this horrible crime that just terrorized this community forever. And it had a lot of characteristics to the Zodiac killings. that happened in San Francisco in 1968, although this was in 1956, 12 years before the Zodiac struck in San Francisco. And so when the bulletin went out that said that Edwards had possibly been in Montana in 1956, and that he should be looked at if he had any unsolved murders, I decided to run his record. Working for the parole board, I had access to the NCIC criminal records, and I also had access to the 1956 Deer Lodge prison records. And it turns out Mr. Edwards was arrested in Great Falls, Montana shortly after our murder for robbery, but nobody connected him to the murder. And he got away with murder in 1956 here in Great Falls and ended up in Deer Lodge Prison, Montana. And that ended up being a very important part of this puzzle also, because the Zodiac killer who killed in 1968 in San Francisco had told one of his surviving victims that he had been in Deer Lodge Prison, that he had stolen a car, that he had killed a guard, and that he was fleeing to Mexico. And every one of those statements told to Brian Hartnell in the September 27th, 1969 Lake Berryessa Zodiac attack were true of Edwards. He had done all of those things, but he didn't do them in 1969 when he was speaking to Brian Hartnell. He had done them in 1956 to 59 when he was in Deer Lodge Prison. And once I tied Edwards to the double murder in my hometown in 56 and realized that he didn't get caught until 2010 at the age of 76, I knew that he had been killing for at least 50 years. And so I decided to follow his life.
And follow what you did. And folks, once again, let me remind you, Detective John A. Cameron has written a book. It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. It's available, of course. You go to HomelandSecurityUS.com or HagmannandHagmann.com. Click on the links there directly to ColdCaseCameron.com, or you can order his book, and it's available elsewhere of Amazon, I believe, right? As well. So I got to tell you, John, it's when we first talked, when I first heard you, excuse me, on Coast to Coast AM, connecting the Zodiac killers and these other killings with one man, I'm thinking, there's just no way in the world this could possibly be true, until I read your book, and I'm looking at the pieces of the puzzle that you put together. And now I've got a completely different. It's not how you look at. Well, it is how you look at things, and if you turn your gaze slightly differently, you'll see things a little bit differently. So you really did put a lot of homework and a lot of thought connecting into your book. And folks, if you want a real life murder mystery, definitely grab purchase his book. I'm just going to tell you, it will not disappoint. But John, okay, so we've got a guy here now that you have on your radar, and you're looking at him and saying, wait a minute, this guy is good for a lot of murders here. And I especially like, by the way, the way that you did grab a hold of his book that he wrote, back in the Metamorphosis of a Criminal. You were able to grab his book that he wrote, this autobiography, back in '72. What'd you learn from that?
Well, that really ended up being the catalyst of solving many of his murders. Mr. Edwards' book, Metamorphosis of a Criminal, written in 1968 at the age of 35, ended up being a puzzle of murder. And inside the book, basically the book was a story of his life from the time he was born until the time he came out of Leavenworth Prison in 1967 at the age of 34, and claimed that he was going to be a reformed criminal. And what he decided to do was he immediately married Kay Hetterly in Akron, Ohio in 1968, got her pregnant 5 times from 1968 to 1973, and portrayed himself as a happily married family man with 5 children. But what he was actually a traveling serial killer with a wife and 5 kids that were really just part of his ruse and allowed him to get access to most of his victims because nobody would suspect. Edwards was a genius, and at a very young age in 1945, he was completely destroyed in Palmerdale Catholic Orphanage in Cleveland, Ohio. He had a very interesting upbringing, which I think I should probably get into right now regarding how he came about this metamorphosis into an outstanding citizen. Mr. Edwards was born in 1933 in the Cleveland, Ohio area, height of the Great Depression. He never knew who his mother was. He was raised by an aunt and uncle up until the age of 5. And then at the age of 5, his mother, who has been in prison for theft, is released from prison in 1938. And the aunt and uncle that had told him that they were his mother and father actually lied to him and finally said, no, we're just your aunt and uncle. Here's your mother. We don't know who your father is. Go live with her. So at 1938, at the height of the Great Depression, he is completely destroyed as to who he really is. He doesn't know who his mom and dad are. He's returned to his mother in Cleveland, Ohio. And within 8 months of being returned to his mother, she's shot in the stomach with a rifle and ends up living for a period of 6 days, isn't brought to the hospital or anything, but is treated in the home and dies in the home. Right after her death, Edward's name is changed. He was actually born Charles Edward Meyer. And then after the shooting death of his mother in 1938, his name is changed to Edward Wayne Edwards. He's 5 years old, and he's placed into Palmerdale Catholic Orphanage in Cleveland, Ohio. And in there, he is run by the nuns and the priests. He's a bedwetter. He's a fire starter. He's sexually deviant. He's raped by the older boys. He's beaten by the nuns. And by 1945, he escapes Palmerdale Catholic Orphanage at the age of 11 and just runs the country, starting then, creating murders of recognition. And what I mean by that is throughout his book that he printed in 1968, he would always say that he was into crime for recognition. And the reason he said that is that nobody recognized him, nobody loved him, he didn't know who his mother was, he didn't know who his father was, and he was always seeking recognition. And this is very important throughout his life and is the reason why many of the murders you discussed at the very beginning of the show sound too horrific and far-fetched for one man to have done them, because they're all murders that we're aware of, whether it be the Atlanta child killings, Joe Benet Ramsey, the Zodiac case, the Black Dahlia, Jimmy Hoffa, anthrax killings. All of these killings were major news and were shock to the conscience of most people. And that's exactly what Ed Edwards meant by creating crimes of recognition. What he loved to do is to create a murder that would shock the conscience so bad in the community, and then steer the evidence towards an innocent person that would once again shock the community as to how could a man do this. You know, most of the people he set up, most people knew these people and said he would have never done this, but the evidence points that way, so he must have done it. And that is how his MO would work, starting in 1945 all the way up until he got caught in 2010, is to create a murder, pick your victims so that it would steer the evidence to an unsuspecting innocent person, and then sit back and watch the system kill for him also. And when you talk about the Zodiac killer in San Francisco, he always made the statement that he was killing slaves for his afterlife. And what Edwards was doing was not only killing, but then getting the system to kill for him and getting the jury to jump on board and kill. And that's what he meant by crimes of recognition. He could sit down any morning with his wife at the coffee table reading the headlines, and on any given day, one of his murders is going to be in the press his whole life. And it was. And that's how he played it out his whole life.
That is hard to, I mean, it's hard to even imagine, but I've got to tell you, when you brought up all of those famous killings, and I'm going to turn over to Joe here, when you brought up all the famous killings, I was waiting for you to say, well, he killed Kennedy too. You know, it's almost as if, well, it's difficult to really wrap at least my brain around thinking thinking about all of these high-profile killings. And folks, let me just say this: had I not witnessed at least that one segment, that one crime that was discussed that at the beginning of the show with Louis D. Nicola as the alleged perpetrator, now exonerated, in the Deborah Sweet murder, had I not been personally involved at some level professionally in that, I would not have believed half of this, or I would have had a hard time, I should say, believing it. But after seeing the internal workings, I've got to tell you, not only is it entirely possible, I believe Mr. Cameron has made just a fantastic case in each of the crimes that he has mentioned, and it's all documented in his book. And we're going to be getting more into that as we go. And we're looking at the macrocosm here. We're looking at one man, but we're also considering, folks, the macrocosm of what's taking place here in America. Isn't this the very same demonic type of spirit that's behind a guy like this is behind others? And if there's one Edward Wayne Edwards out there, how many more are out there? And how many more killings are being done in this fashion with this MO? It's pretty interesting. Joe?
Yeah, Mr. Cameron, I thank you for. I know my dad ordered some of these your books, and I think you sent some, and I started reading through some of the stuff in here. And I know you. How long did you suspect him before he was actually caught?
I never even knew who he was until after he was caught in 2010. And the only reason I did know who he was is I just happened to be working in the right position in Deer Lodge Prison to have gotten access to a memo that was sent out in 2010 that after his capture and confession, they sent it out to states that he had visited and had talked about in his book, and Great Falls, Montana was one of them. And so I really just got introduced to him out of the blue because I had an unsolved double murder from 1956, and the possibility that he did it was looking really good. So I decided to confront him with a letter and just ask him to confess to the 56 murder. I had no idea that he was going to end up being what he ended up being, and I never followed any of those major cases. I just was a murder investigator with an unsolved murder. I wrote him a letter, asked him if he would just confess to it since he was in prison, and let's get it over with. But what it turned into was a one-year game between him and I and a friend of mine, unraveling what he had really done. And that's what Edwards was his whole life, was a game player. And that's what his book ended up becoming, was a game. It was actually the solution to all of his murders he had done from 1945 to 68. But he wanted somebody to read it, look at his records, and follow his life, and the murders would be revealed. And that's what happened in 2010 and 11 when I started confronting him.
Wow. Approximately how many people did he set up that's been proven that were found guilty or suspected as being the murderers when it was actually this other guy?
Well, I found about 24 from 1945 all the way up through 2009 until his capture that he had actually successfully set up. Many of those died in prison. One of them was executed, and there's 8 still serving that I know of right now on his murders. And there's going to be many more because that really was his MO, and ever since I've released the book and the website, the amount of other murders coming to my attention is really unbelievable. I knew it would be like that, though, because this man spent every waking moment of his life killing people because that's what he liked to do. And that's what he said in the Zodiac Ciphers in 1968, is that it was more fun to kill people than wild game. And it really was a clue. Edwards was satanic from a very young age and just steered everything against Christianity, religion, and played the role of Satan.
That's one thing I got from your book very clearly. Perhaps one of the most satanic individuals I've ever read about, and the anti-Christian aspect to him, whether or not you could blame it on his upbringing or pin it to his early years, well, that's up for debate. But what's not up for debate is the fact that here's a guy who wrote, published his own autobiography in 1972, claimed to be a former criminal, now a successful writer, family man, and perhaps even worse, after he published his book, he traveled the country for, as you had said, for up to 5 decades with his wife and kids, handing out his book to the media, law enforcement everywhere, claiming to be, and I'll quote you in this, a soldier for Jesus Christ. Meanwhile, killing our children everywhere. Wow, that's just incredible.
Well, he had that family and wife and children, and that really helped him pull it off. He would walk into a church on a Sunday and give a speech with his wife and 5 kids, and then travel that day to a neighboring state and kill a couple on a lover's lane. I mean, that's just one little incident that he did in 1977 in Ohio. But he did that every year. The family was always a ruse, and there were 2 other wives prior to 1968. And I was fortunate to find his wife from 1956 when he was here in Great Falls, Montana. And what I learned from her was that for an 8-month period that she ran around with him, 1955-56, he traveled to every part of this country, killing couples on lovers' lanes, crucifying 3 kids in a park in Chicago, kidnapping little girls sleeping in their cribs in Iowa, torturing women on college campuses. He had a set of ritual murders he did 1955-56 before he came to my hometown, and he did them with his wife. And then he got caught for robbery in Montana, and nobody connected the dots, and nobody questioned his wife. And after he went to Deer Lodge Prison, nobody questioned his wife again, and she didn't get questioned until 2011, when I finally connected him to many, many murders and found her alive down in Idaho. And it really unraveled the whole story of what he had done. He would just take those ritualistic murders that he did in that 8-month period here in Montana in 55, 56, and he would repeat those murders over and over again in different parts of the country, make them similar and tie them together with names and places and dates as part of his puzzle, so that if someone were to read his book that he published, they'd be able to tie not only all the murders he did prior to 1968 and writing the book, but all the murders he did after publishing the book. He just replicated them over and over and over again, taunting the police and press with his intelligence in letters and phone calls, movie appearances, TV show appearances, preaching at police academies, preaching at legal academies. He would stand in front of everybody, and nobody would suspect him, and that's how he got away with it.
Hiding in plain sight, then. Just hiding in plain sight.
Yes, in fact, that's in 1972 when he appeared on a game show called To Tell the Truth. He had just killed everybody in the Zodiac killings. He had just standing on TV telling everybody that he used to be one of the worst criminals, that he was on the FBI's most wanted list, and that he was a suspect in a double murder. And nobody caught what was going on. It was just him standing there sucking in all the glory of being on national TV, standing in front of the world as the Zodiac killer, and nobody knew it. And the whole show was just a game of try to figure out who the real Ed Edwards is. Is he a family man or is he a killer? And you can watch that on my website, coldcasecameron.com, October 17th, 1972. It's in the timeline. And it's really rather incredible to show you the intelligence of a serial killer at the age of 35 and how he can con America.
I've got to tell you, I'm absolutely captivated by your book, John. I really am. I just, it seems like everyone loves a good mystery, but this is a mystery on steroids. It's beyond anything I've ever considered before. And one of the reasons that I'm glad you're on is because we're looking at a specific MO, or I shouldn't say MO, a specific agenda. We're seeing this satanic, and I mean Luciferian, satanic type of motivation that is it's indescribable.
And the rituals to kidnapping and murder, and we have a man named Russ Disdar works with police officers down in Canton, Ohio, on occult crimes, and we're seeing an explosion of these occult crimes. In your workings, has it been more prevalent as time has as we've gotten to now, or has these occasionally popped up in random fashion?
What I recall about the satanic kind of the satanic scare of the 80s and 90s when I was a police officer, the late 80s, early 90s. Geraldo Rivero did a bunch of shows on satanic activity, and most of us, if we watched any of that, we were concerned with teenagers dressed in black, with black hair, black fingernails, long black jackets, all this silliness, really. Satanic and what Edwards was so far beyond any of that stuff that he felt that he wanted to go down in history as an ancient Egyptian god from the old ages, and that he was going to be the best criminal ever. And that's why he titled his book Metamorphosis of a Criminal. What it really meant, as he ran around saying, I'm a reformed criminal, it really was the metamorphosis of a serial killer into the best criminal ever. And so what Edwards would do is follow every other serial killer making the news. If someone got busted, he would commit a killing that would take away their recognition. And they would always have a satanic side to them. And by that, it could be something as simple as a star stamped on the forehead with a four-pointed knife that he would use. Or he would carve the Big Dipper into the thigh of a little boy in 1955, just before he came to Great Falls, Montana. He tied white shoelaces on one side of a boy and left on his other side, and he would tie in the light and the dark together in his crimes, the good and the bad, and that's because that's what he was. He was a bad guy, and he was a family man. And on the front of his book cover, he actually places the two people that he is on the front cover. And the cover says this. It says, he was on the FBI's list of the 10 most wanted criminals. He was a hold-up man, a bank robber, a dangerous character. He spent 14 years in 5 jails. Now he is a writer, a respected citizen, and the head of a family of 5. Metamorphosis of a Criminal, the true life story of Ed Edwards. And in the top left corner is the killer posed for attack with a gun in his hand, and in the bottom right corner is the man dressed in the business suit, carrying the attaché, wearing a nice hat. Edwards would portray himself as a police officer, a doctor of psychiatry, and a preacher. And those are the 3 most trusting people you can have. And then he would kill someone close to whoever he groomed his way into. But he was always able to get right into his, because he was safe. He was the charmer. He was trusting. He was nice-looking, intelligent. And then, boom, the murder would happen, and nobody would know who did it. And they didn't know it was that nice man that just gave the speech at the church on Sunday. That's the kind of satanic he was. He didn't have to have the black fingernails and the black hair and the black jacket. He had to be the nicest-looking, trustworthy guy that could get right into you and then kill someone close to you.
That's frightening. This is the enemy that you never would expect necessarily, or obviously the goth-looking characters, or if you go back into the 50s, the leather-jacketed thugs on the subways. Of course, if you remember the movie In Cold Blood that caused such a sensation, that type of killer. Now you've got this guy, Edward Wayne Edwards, who is this personification, or at least our personification of good, that is actually one of the most evil characters I certainly have ever read about. And I got to say this, folks, we're talking with John A. Cameron. He's a retired Great Falls, Montana cold case detective, and he really got into the crimes of this man, Edward Wayne Edwards, for a 3-year period, beginning when he actually befriended Edwards back in 2010. And I've got to say, the results of your research in this book are compelling to say the least, whether it be the Zodiac killings or whether it be Chandra Levy or whether it be Marilyn Shepard, which surprised me, or John Benet Ramsey. I mean, we've got so much to discuss this evening as we take apart, as we gradually dissect the MO, and the activities of this man. What struck you? We're getting close to the top of the hour here, but I've got to ask you, what struck you the most? If you had to describe Edward Wayne Edwards in a paragraph, how would you describe him?
I guess what struck me the most from this whole thing is people's reaction to what he could have possibly done. Because you immediately want to shut it off that it's impossible. There's no way somebody could do that. There's no way somebody could kill that many people in so many horrific murders that we all have heard about. But when you look at it as the simplest way, he didn't get caught till he was 76. He wrote a book when he was 39 that claimed he was reformed, and he wasn't. He appeared on TV shows, churches, police academies, lawyers' places, preaching that he was reformed. And then at the age of 76, he gets identified as a serial killer. I could see it clear as day after I found Great Falls, Montana in the book, but most people couldn't wrap their minds around it. And so that's why he was successful. So if there's one thing that stands out about Edwards, is he was so successful. He had no conscience, and he could stand in front of you and lie to your face, and you wouldn't even know it. And that's why he was so successful.
Amazing. Sounds like some people that we have in Washington, D.C. at the moment, or all across positions of leadership to some extent. What really struck me as I was going through the book, reading the book, was the use of, and this especially came in with respect to the Zodiac killer, the way that, and I want to get this kind of correctly here, the way he would use specific symbology or coding for identification purposes, but that also seemed like it was ritualistic in another fashion, where he would use both symbology as well as numerology, dates maybe, even if you want to read into it, perhaps in a ritualistic manner. Have you picked up on that, or were you looking at that pretty heavily?
You know, that all just kind of played into it, and that's exactly what he was doing. It was all numerology and mathematics, and always trying to tie back to his identity. And that's what the Zodiac killer always teased everybody with, was his identity. And the reason that Edwards' identity was so important was that he had no idea who he was. Born Charles Meyer, name changed to Edward Edwards, doesn't know who his real mother is, doesn't know who his real father is. That's why the Zodiac's identity was so important, and that's why he teased us his whole life with it. And many of the Zodiac ciphers were based on Edwards' own name, symbols in mirror image, and he used his own letters in his name to make some of the symbols he used in those cryptographs, so that eventually, when you figured out what he was basing it all on, and that was Egyptian history, ancient Egyptians, Satans, you would put it together. And a friend of mine had studied all those areas and lives next to me, and it got involved in the investigation and ended up cracking all of the Zodiac ciphers, and they did name Edwards. And it was an intense time in 2010 dealing with Mr. Edwards and my friend and what was going on. So,
man, it just when I got to that part in the book, I had to read it more than once, just to really get the full weight I thought I understood what was going on here, especially with the symbology, the numerology, the occult nature of things. But the messages, it seemed like the messages were very clear, or clear to the extent that if you knew what you were looking for, you'd be able to see it. But in this, like in other cases, you'd have to take a couple of steps back, or quite a few steps back, to look at the bigger picture, look at the larger picture as to what was going on with this guy and what was going on all across the country as he traveled to different places. And how many? I mean, there were a few areas of the country that he didn't travel to. I mean, he was all over the place, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think I have 22 states listed in my book for murders, but ever since releasing the book and going on coast to coast in other programs, the amount of other murders that people have found themselves just based on looking for the MO, because he always left it out there. It's one thing Edwards always wanted to do, was he wanted to be caught, but he wanted to be challenged, and he wanted it to live on forever. And so he put it all out there on the internet for an investigator to put together if they did their work. And we were just in a very good position in Montana in 2010 to put this all together, having Deer Lodge Prison in my backyard and having him have been there in 56. And it really just was almost timing. It was supposed to be revealed sometime in 2010 was the time.
Any significance for 2010? I mean, with him as opposed to with, or was it just serendipitous that 2010 to the year 2010 was when everything kind of came open at his age at that time? 76, you said, in 2010, correct?
I almost think it was him on purpose, because when he got revealed in June of 2010 as a serial killer, at the same time, the West Memphis 3 boys down in West Memphis were being released from prison on a murder that they didn't do. And they didn't know that the real killer, Ed Edwards, was sitting in jail in Ohio at the same time. But Edwards actually had committed that West Memphis 3 murder in 93, and he had committed an exact replica of it in 1955, just before he came to Great Falls. So, yeah, that was it was about timing. And 2010 is when a lot of his cases were in court and a lot of innocent people were getting convicted.
And before we go to the break, Mr. Cameron, and I'm still going to call you Detective Cameron, hopefully that's not a problem, because once a detective, always a detective in my book, but and a very good one at that, I must say. And folks, get the book, read the book, because you will appreciate the links, the obvious sleepless nights that Detective Cameron had gone through to connect the pieces of the puzzle. I'm a big proponent of books, but I'm also a big proponent of connecting dots, as our audience knows very well. And the dot connecting that Detective Cameron, John A. Cameron, has done in his book, it's just second to none. It's an investigative masterpiece as far as I'm concerned, and it's extremely compelling. But just before the break, just so everyone knows, Edward Wayne Edwards is no longer with us, correct?
Yes, he died April 7th, 2011 in an Ohio prison. He was going to be executed in August of 2011.
Isn't that interesting? He died before his execution date. In death, well, one can say in death, perhaps there are messages that are sent as well. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Very interesting broadcast. Our very special guest is John A. Cameron. He's the author of It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. Folks, grab this book. Go to.
Gentlemen, hour number 2 of the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this Monday, July 28th, 2014. Our very special guest today, Mr. John Cameron. He's the author of a book, It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. It goes into great detail about the life of a man who was killing people for 50 years, I believe, up to 50 years, 40, 50 years, without being caught. And there are many elements to this crime: Zodiac, occult, ritual killings. America's Most Wanted is one of the chapters in this book, and I did read that chapter about Mr. Walsh's son, who was kidnapped and killed. And there's a lot of interesting John Benet Ramsey that is a part of the chapter in here also. And I'm going to turn it over to my dad to ask the first question in this hour. So you take it away, Dad, and then
thank you, Joe.
Jump in.
Thanks. John, thanks for hanging with us and putting up with our audio problems. I'm not sure if you're hearing reverb or not. It's a little bit distracting on our end. Anyway, folks, go to coldcasecameron.com. It's accessible via HomelandSecurityUS.com or HagmannandHagmann.com. HagmannandHagmann.com, newly revised website. It'll contain all sorts of audio clips, including this one, as well as the previous shows and news for upcoming shows. But having said that, Detective Cameron, I was talking earlier today, in addition to the detective I mentioned, with an investigator who was active in working the Zodiac murders. And his aspect of this, or his interest in this, was the satanic aspect of this, the Satan worship. It had to do with another prisoner, a prisoner setting up a prisoner, perhaps you could say that, Satan worship, church by day, coven by night, if you will. It's my understanding, based on my conversation with this investigator, that the FBI has DNA from the Zodiac killer, actually, from the back of a postage stamp that was affixed to a postcard that is ostensibly to the of the Zodiac killer. Have you heard this, and has that DNA been matched to Edwards, and has Edwards' DNA been collected?
Edwards' DNA was put into the CODIS system in 2010, actually. And in regards to any DNA in the Zodiac case, there isn't any DNA that they can say is the Zodiac killer's. But there's one aspect of all of Edwards' murders that investigators have to take into consideration, because he did it at every one of them. And that is, he planted evidence of others at the scene. And so that the majority of the time, the DNA would never match, although DNA didn't even exist back at the Zodiac time. You know,
Correct.
Blood analysis, hair analysis, saliva, semen, false blood patterns left at the scene. Edwards planted evidence at every one of his murders throughout his whole life, and he admits all this in some of the interviews I did with him and in some of the letters he sent in the Zodiac case. And what that allowed him to do was to always be able to say, even when he became a suspect in a murder, go ahead and check the evidence, because it would never match. And that was deliberate on his part. Many times he left hair clutched in the hands of his female victims. And that would be a sign that they must have struggled with their killer, so therefore that hair must be the killer's. But it was planted. It would never steer to him. So in the Great Falls 1956 case, the double Lovers Lane murder here that Edwards did here, they recovered DNA in 2002 off a glass slide that had been taken in the autopsy. And from 2002 until 2010, they really never investigated the case. They just checked the DNA. And that's what's happened in many, many, many of Edwards' cases over the decades, is he would come up as a suspect, police would check the DNA, and it doesn't match, so you just move on. Well, if the evidence is planted, then it's false, and you have to dig a little deeper. And Edwards taunted the police every decade in letters and phone calls with that exact information, that you have to look at his killings outside the box. And so just checking the DNA wouldn't work. In this case, we checked the DNA in Great Falls here in June of 2010. It did not match, but it was clear that he did the murder because he put it in the book. He put it in his book. And then we found that he admitted planting evidence throughout his life. And that's how another way he got away with it.
Very interesting. And obviously, yes, you're correct. The processing of DNA evidence was not non-existent back in the day, of course, and has only come of late. But I'm probably going to slaughter this, but in the movie Silence of the Lambs, John, you probably saw that movie, but for me it's been a while. One of the scenes that I will never forget is when Jodie Foster meets Anthony Hopkins behind the bars, and is attempting to understand or attempting to learn about the crimes being committed, subsequent crimes committed. And Hopkins says, "You've got to go back to the beginning." Basically, I'm paraphrasing. You've got to go back to the start, the first crime. Do you recall that? Or does that mean anything to you? Hold any particular meaning in the context of this serial killer?
Well, I remember that movie very well. That was in the late 80s, and that's when we were all kind of obsessing about the new serial killer movies. And, yeah, that's exactly right. You have to go back to the beginning. History is what I kept being told by either Edwards or his cohorts in prison, that it was always about history, John. Go back to history. When I was confronting Edwards in 2010, and I've connected him to the Zodiac killings and the killing here and JonBenet Ramsey, I was confronting him by phone and letter and kind of being cocky with him. And he kept telling me that I may be right on some of the things, but that I wasn't right. I didn't know the whole story. And what he was trying to tell me was I really didn't understand the extent of what he had done. You know, it was hard enough realizing that he had killed here in 56, that he killed in the Zodiac case in 68, that he killed JonBenet Ramsey in 96, and now he's confessing the murders in 2010. But the extent of what he has done was way beyond anything I ever imagined it would lead to. But he always left the evidence out there to be followed, and that's really all I did, is just start following the evidence. And it just unraveled into something that everybody said to me in the last 4 years, it's too unbelievable to believe. And it is, unless you just change your thought process, think outside of the box. And the man was brilliant and just got away with it for 66 years, standing in front of us. And that's really the essence of it.
That's right, and there it is, folks. We always talk about thinking out of the box, looking at the bigger picture, getting a better understanding of what's really taking place right in front of us, right before us. And again, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, we speak about the satanic ritual abuse and satanic killings, the satanic activity, especially here in the northwest part of northeast part of the country, Cleveland, Ohio, western Pennsylvania, western New York. It's rife with this type of activity. Now you are talking with, or you're listening to, I should say, a man who has dissected much of what Russ Dizdar and others have been talking about. This is the relevance here. John, let me ask you, out of all of the investigations or all of the killings, and there are many, and incidents, attacked, if you will, which one surprised you the most? And then we can go back and discuss, each one individually. But which one really kind of, when you learned of it, kind of took your breath away?
Well, I was actually led to this case through Edward's daughter, April. And that case would be the Atlanta child killings from 1979, 80, 81. I never would have suspected Edwards of being involved in that until I interviewed his daughter. And this became very important. His daughter supplied me a timeline of her life as she could remember it. And I'd like to read a little portion of it because it all has to do with Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania Pennsylvania was one of the most important states for him, because he was placed in a secure Catholic detention facility in Pennsylvania at the age of 15. He had actually killed 3 years prior to being 15 and killed a whole bunch of people and got away with it, but got locked up in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and in 1945, 46. And so he spent his whole life in Pennsylvania, especially in the 70s and 80s, hiding his family there and then killing in neighboring states. But from 1979 until about 1989, here's what his daughter said she recalled about living in Pennsylvania. 1980-81. I suspect Dad of killing an African-American boy, age 5 to 7. Believe the boy was giving Jeff a hard time in school. Jeff would come home and tell Dad about it. One day the boy wasn't in school. Dad said someone hit him in the head with a baseball bat and he died. I remember the middle school I attended was called Greenway Middle, so the elementary school should be located around the middle school. That was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 1980-81. Then in 1981-82, they're in Portersville, Pennsylvania. My dad was arrested for shoplifting. I didn't know this at the time. My mom told me later. She had to bail him out of jail. Dad set the fire on a house we were renting. Authorities suspected him of arson. We left town quickly. Atlanta, Georgia, 1981. We stayed with a police officer's family. Authorities from Pennsylvania found Dad and came and arrested him for arson. So they're back in Pennsylvania in 1982, and they lived in a rented house in McCon Mill State Park while Dad was arrested. At this time, we heard of a body being found in or around the state park. I believe it was a female. We lived in this residence until Dad burned it down and they found a police uniform. So all through the 80s, Edwards was spending most of his time in Pennsylvania and traveling at every end of the country killing. And he did the Zodiac killings, actually. No, not the Atlanta child killings. While he was actually stationed in Pennsylvania, he was traveling down to Atlanta where he actually had a cousin that lived there that was a member of a police force. And he stole a uniform, and he used that police uniform to kill all those kids in Atlanta. So back in the 1979, 80, 81, when the Atlanta child killings happened, the police never released a letter that the Zodiac killer sent during the Atlanta child killings, and it's very important, so I'm going to read it to you.
Okay.
It was March of 1981. The Zodiac killer sent a letter to the Atlanta police, and it said this: "Hello, it's me. Haven't you people figured out who's killing these little people? I'll give you a hint. I used to be in San Francisco. I used to stalk women, but I like to kill children now. At all my victims' bodies, I have left certain clues, but I guess it's too much for you rebels to handle. So I guess I'll have to tell you, I like to kill children because they are so easy to pick off. By the way, if you still have letters from the other murders, I am not writing in the same handwriting. Signed, the Zodiac, with the Zodiac cross and circle." And right there, he was telling the police that what he's doing is he's leaving false evidence at all the scenes. Items clutched in the hand, hairs clutched in the hand, blood, semen of others wiped on the victims. And he's teasing them in false letters and changing his handwriting. And that was his MO his whole life, was to kill, tease the police with false letters about his intelligence, and be standing right in front of them. And in the Atlanta child case, he was one of them. He was a police officer, and he had an in through his relative down in Marietta, Georgia.
This, by the way, folks, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but while during the period of the Atlanta child killings, you, John, were a cadet. You were in the police academy, and you were studying these killings for a class project. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In 79, 80, 81, that's when I attended the Minnesota Police Academy. I was 18, 19, and 20. And we did a project on the Atlanta child killings. What happened there is 24 little kids in an 18-month period were kidnapped, brutally killed, laid out in church parking lots, police parking lots, ritualistically laid out. The police were teased with letters from the killer. And then an innocent man named Wayne Williams was basically set up, arrested, and is still serving time right now, and named as the Atlanta child killer. He was convicted for killing 2 adults in 1981, but after his conviction for those 2 adults, the police just said he was the Atlanta child killer. And for all these years, people have always said that Wayne Williams was the Atlanta child killer, but Edwards actually sent another letter claiming responsibility for the Atlanta child killers, and I think this one's more important to read than the last one, so I'd like to read it.
Please.
This is a 1981 letter that Ed Edwards sent to the Atlanta police shortly before they arrested Wayne Williams. Well, you're all afraid, you're all upset, 'cause none of those cops have caught me yet. I've struck again and didn't leave a clue. Now the whole city doesn't know what to do. You finally found Luby. He's been there all the while. Keep looking. You might find another child. You think that number stops at 19? Man, there are some things you haven't seen. One night, some kids got killed in a fire. I struck the match, so the death toll is higher. But you can't seem to catch me. I wonder why. Thousands of you see me every day as I pass by. It's pathetic to think that I can get away with first-degree murder on any chosen day. Politicians are worried as the plot thickens, leaders running around like headless chickens. All different cops can't cooperate with the others. You'll never catch me, you bumbling mothers. Go back to the ridiculous, to the sublime, and you will find that I have been with you every time. You better start looking before it's too late, or there'll be another 5048. So as I leave you with this piece of evidence, don't do something stupid like dust it for prints. Signed, The Ghost Killer. And that was Edward's poem telling the police that he had been standing in front of them all along, that he was actually one of them, and that he was planting evidence, and that he realized that if he played it the right way, the police wouldn't cooperate with each other, the leaders of the Atlanta Police Department wouldn't cooperate, and it was the biggest FBI task force in history in the Atlanta child killings. And it came at a time when Atlanta was changing from an all-white department to an all-black department leadership. And Edwards targeted that area just to create racial hatred. So he went in there and killed 24 little black kids. So what you had was a white police officer killing 24 black kids, which created hatred, and that's exactly what it did.
And I must say, by the way, it was during this time period when you read that poem, of course, that's my personal, shall we say, personal involvement, or at least personal experience with this particular case in terms of the killings that he referenced when he said, one night 2 kids got killed in a fire, I struck the match, so the death toll is higher, referencing the murder that I worked for the defense back some time ago. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, the setup of Louis D. Nicola, which actually was 1981, 82, 83, right when this letter came in. So here's Edward,
correct,
setting a clue in the Atlanta child killings that he's the actual killer of those 2 little kids and that man in that fire up there in Pennsylvania. So the problem the police had is that whenever Edward sent a letter, whether it was the Zodiac killer letter or the Ghost Killer letter or the letters he sent to John Walsh later on in life, it always left you guessing if they were fakes or if this is real. Is there really a man out there that is this good? And there was, but nobody knew who it was, and nobody wanted to believe that somebody could be that smart. But he gave a clue in the letter when he said, I guess you rebels can't figure it out, is he was trying to get you to look north. He was a northerner, an Ohio guy, coming down to Atlanta to kill children. That's how all of his letters were. Yeah.
So, okay. Man alive. Folks, I mean, this is absolutely incredible when you start looking, again, at the bigger picture here. And because of our Christian focus, we see right now, we see that the absolute hatred of Christianity among people. And I'm looking at this from a number of different perspectives. I'm looking at this from an investigative perspective, in my view, looking at what you present, and it's a very compelling case. But I'm also looking at the bigger picture here, the satanic agenda behind this. And it seems like especially with the Zodiac killers, it's almost as if, or Zodiac killings, I should say, it's almost as if one Satan worshiper is setting up another, or attempting to, or wasn't there something in prison that was said between or about the Zodiac killing that set off some alarm bells? I'm going from memory here, so I could be just a tad off.
Oh, there is so much satanic reference in regards to what the Zodiac did throughout all of his letters. They always had satanic reference. But the most the most distinct one everybody recalls is the Zodiac killer killed Brian Hartnell, or tried to kill Brian Hartnell and Cecile Shepard on Lake Berryessa, September 27th, 1969. And he targeted Cecilia Shepard only because of her name, Shepard, because he had killed Marilyn Shepard in 1954, 14 years earlier. So Cecilia only became the target to kill just because of her name. And she and Brian went to that beach September 27th and were approached by a man wearing the executioner's hood and also wearing the Zodiac sign on the front of his black garb. And Edwards and another Deer Lodge prison inmate named Frank Dryman had actually wore that priest getup with the Zodiac sign in Deer Lodge prison back in 1956 to 59 when they were running around pretending to be satanic priests inside Deer Lodge prison. They were studying the occult, Aleister Crowley, ancient Egyptian history, and they were playing out, horrible satanic rituals in Deer Lodge prison together. And that's why in 1969, when Edwards did the Lake Berryessa killing, he wore the Zodiac sign on his chest like the Catholic priest wears on their cassock, and he wore the executioner's hood because he was the executioner. That's the reason he wore it. He was able to set people up and watch the system execute them. And he was in Deer Lodge prison 56 to 59 when a man was executed in California for a murder that he had actually done. And so when he came out in 67, he decided to go back to the San Francisco Bay Area and exact revenge for that wrongful execution of Burden Abbott in 1957. And he terrorized the Bay Area, especially his whole life, through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way till 2008. He returned to California Bay Area, killing over and over and over again there. Anytime somebody convicted an innocent person, he would return to that state and kill. And I know there's a lot more in Pennsylvania that I have not looked into, but there are a lot. I received a lot of calls from Pennsylvania after my coast-to-coast radio show about a month and a half ago, with people telling me about murders out there that they thought he had done. And I knew he had done a lot out there, but I couldn't spend my time on each and every murder. I only tried to go with the ones that he got a lot of recognition on, and what that meant was a lot of press and publicity.
Understood.
And the Egyptian stuff, I was reading here, there's something about the Egyptian Book of the Dead and ancient mythology that he was fascinated by.
Yes.
What kind of evidence was there, or what was there that he was? I read that he claimed to talk to some kind of being from 1904, or he was in communications with some dead spirit, he claimed?
Well, let me kind of expound on that satanic part of it and the occult studying. A lot of his occult studying started very early in the 40s when he was still in Catholic orphanage in Cleveland, Ohio. He began to study Aleister Crowley, who in the late 19th century was the leading occultist, who was claiming that the 20th century was going to bring on a movement of man will do what it will, what it wants, and the moral fabric will destruct, and that it will become murder and mayhem. And that's what Edward studied his whole life, was Aleister Crowley and ancient Egyptian history. And what he felt he was the ancient Egyptian god Osiris, who was the lord of the underworld. He was let's just say, the Jesus Christ of ancient Egyptian history, only on the dark side. He was the one who collected the sinners and took care of them in their afterlife. And that's exactly what the Zodiac had said in his cryptograms. And so as Edwards got older and he became a media magnet, publishing his books, publishing albums, publishing documentaries, he started to blog on internet sites that were kind of devoted to his murders. And he kind of describes exactly what he represented in one of the blogs, and I think if I read it, maybe it would help people understand exactly what he felt he was, and here it is. In the Osirian mysteries, you find that the Egyptian god Osiris, who represents the Lord of the Dead, ruler of the underworld, is the dispenser of justice, and in Masonic terminology, the zodiac is represented by an oblong square with 4 cardinal points in each corner, and Osiris in the middle. Osiris is ruled by Saturn, which rules the day Saturday, and is represented by the Nile River. In the Osirian mysteries, the drama is always carried out between the waxing to the full moon on a sacred lake. Osiris is represented in several mythologies by either the sun or the moon. Osiris has been known to represent the ruler of the dead. That is, he judges the sinners and collects their souls for purification in the afterlife. Many of Zodiac's killings were on a Saturday or close to midnight hour on Friday. He unconsciously or consciously chose to kill around bodies of water or references to water. He planned his killings between the waxing to full moon. If Zodiac were a Mason, he may have identified himself with Osiris and may have felt protected by that identification. That's actually Ed Edwards blogging who he really is, August 19th, 2000 on ZodiacKiller.com. And he did feel he was Osiris. He was collecting the sinners. What he would do is rope people into his conspiracies. Those people wouldn't know that somebody was going to die, but they may have fudged a little bit because maybe whatever the conspiracy was going to get him some money, get him some sex, get him something. If Edwards could get those people to sin, then he could justify killing their kid or their wife or their husband or their friend. And then he would have them in his afterlife based on the Osirian mysteries. That's really what he thought he was. And, whether or not in reality that's true or could be true, nobody's going to know that. But he played it out as if it was actually factual.
Wow. Now, Edwards released back in 2000 the website Black. I always want to say Delilah, but it's how do you pronounce that? Black Dahlia.
BlackDahliaSolution.org.
Right. Okay. Yeah. There we go. And there it was a treasure trove, I suspect, of information about who he actually was, and with that, I suppose, let me back up just a little bit, because when I was going through your book, I got the sense that as you uncovered bit by bit, piece by piece of the information that connected Edwards to other crimes, that the officials, the FBI, the police departments, they weren't exactly too thrilled with your findings. They weren't exactly thrilled with the fact that, hey, this could be the guy. Is that accurate, or is that kind of an overstatement?
No, that's probably that's more than accurate. Actually, from day one, in 2010 when this started, it was amazing how this has been not wanted to be divulged. And there was a reason for that, because all throughout the country, the first thing Edwards would do when he would show up in a town with his family and move in is he would go down to the police station to introduce himself. As the former Marine hero, criminal investigator for the Armed Services Division, whatever the bull he was saying was, he always had the false identity and the false credentials to prove that's exactly who he was. And so he was always right inside the cops. And so when he got discovered in 2010 and decided that he was going to go public on TV and start confessing to murders, some investigators had to have noticed him. There's no doubt. I came across so much resentment for even digging into this, and it only got worse as time went on. And so I'm sure it's probably pretty clear in my book that I was getting a little frustrated with law enforcement. But the fact of the matter is, Edwards played law enforcement and prosecutors his whole life with false letters and false information, and got away with it. And now all of a sudden he's revealed. And all of the people that were involved in many of these cases that people were wrongfully convicted have gone on and written books or produced movies or became judges or were promoted to FBI or whatever the next step was. And now all of a sudden it's all false. because the evidence was false. And it almost seemed like it would be easier for them just to shut up about it, don't talk about it, we don't want to hear about it. That's really how it all played out. And that's why I had to write the book, because a year into this, I knew that nobody was going to investigate Edwards, and I was begging for them to do it, and they wouldn't do it. So I just decided I was going to do it, and I did it with the help of a lot of friends here in Montana. And it took us 4 years to put the book together, which is really just a piece of the puzzle, a very small piece of what this man did, but I hoped that it would at least show the MO and what to look for in other cases.
And that's just it, folks. When you look at the book, when you read the book, you'll see things. I mean, I saw things in this book that brought back memories of our conversations, ladies and gentlemen, with Russ Dizdar and others, about the satanic, about the characteristics of certain individuals. So this is a book that fits very well in the topics in which we discuss, or about which we discuss. I must have, John, I'll tell you what, we're going a little bit out of order here. Of course, we're not operating off of any script, but I must have about 40 emails right now wanting to know. You had said, wait a minute, did I hear him correctly say something about the anthrax attacks? I'm going to have a revolt on my hands, I think, in my inbox or my email if I don't ask you right now about the anthrax attacks of 2001. Did I hear you correctly? And, of course, I did, but you want to take a shot at explaining what that was all about?
Yeah, actually the anthrax attacks came into the investigation about year number 3 into the investigation. I really started, investigating his life from 1933 and worked my way all the way up to 2009, and then I'd have to go back and go over it again because of new information that had come in. But the anthrax attacks occurred September 18th, 2001, which was 7 days after 9/11. And that's really what Edwards' whole goal was with doing the anthrax attacks, was to steal the recognition that the 9/11 terrorists had gotten for bombing the building and killing 3,000 people. Just prior to the anthrax attacks, which were, once again, September of 2001, Edwards had kidnapped Chandra Levy in May of 2001.
Right,
and if you
May 7th,
know the case of Chandra Levy, she was from Modesto, which is the Bay Area. She attended the University of Southern California. She was a journalism student. She was a criminal justice student. And her last year, 2001, she was given the responsibility to be the press person for the pending execution of Timothy McVeigh. And in 2001, Timothy McVeigh was going to be executed on June 11th. And he was the Oklahoma City bomber. He had killed 168 people in the Oklahoma City bombings in 1995, I believe, and was being labeled by the press as the most prolific killer in the United States. So Edwards wanted to prove a point and killed Chandra Levy and tried to set up Congressman Gary Condit. And it almost worked. Through that whole summer of 2001, the press, the public, destroyed Gary Condit, the congressman, killing Chandra Levy. And then 9/11 happened. And all of a sudden, Chandra Levy's out of the news, Gary Condit's out of the news. The only thing in the news is the 3,000 people killed in 9/11. 7 days later, and it's 7 days, which is a religious period of time on the 7th day, Edwards mails anthrax to the National Enquirer down in Florida, 2 members of Congress, and 3 other media outlets, and ties it to Islam just to create terror. And eventually, an innocent chemist, the FBI named publicly as the anthrax killer in 2004, and then they had to recant that and give him $4.5 million. And then later on in 2008, Dr. Ivins was the next guy they decided must be the anthrax killer. So they named him the anthrax killer publicly, and then he dies in a bathtub July 27th, 2008, from an overdose of Tylenol. The anthrax case was, when it came in to this, I was shocked. But he is the anthrax killer, and he was blogging about it on ZodiacKiller.com. And he has been doing quite a series of murders from 2001 all the way through up until his capture in 2009 that were all tied together against the U.S. government. He was the most prolific killer ever, and every time somebody else got in the paper, he made sure he committed a crime that would outdo the one that was in the paper. And the anthrax attacks did exactly that. We all thought that Islam was in here killing us.
Yeah.
Islamic terrorists
Yeah.
were anthraxing us, and it worked.
Of course, and certainly with I don't mean to interrupt, but you know, in retrospect, and as I went through your website, and also throughout your book, looking at this at his MO, looking at Wayne Edwards, his I don't even know how to describe. I suppose just his nature, and I say nature because his satanic nature, his plus his need for this recognition. Man, it does fit.
That's really
fits.
it. The need for the recognition is really what, I never really understood that at the very beginning of this case when I kept hearing him write about it and say that it was always about recognition. I thought, well, if it's about recognition, then why don't you just stand up and tell me you're the Zodiac, you're this, you're that, you're that. But that's not what he was seeking. He was seeking to be the guy that will always be in the paper, will always be on the news, and forever. And nobody would really know who he really was, but he could sit back and watch it play out through the news and the media and watch people die at his say-so. If he said somebody did it, they arrested people and they convicted them, just like Mr. DiNicola. That was just one very simple setup, but all he did is he just provided a false piece of information that DiNicola supposedly told him, and it was a lie, and it worked and got that guy sentenced. That's how he did it everywhere. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, I find it fascinating too, and fascinating, folks. Please understand my terminology is. Forgive my terminology if it sounds improper, but I'm looking at this and I'm thinking he gets a twofer, so to speak. For example, he sets someone up for a capital murder case. That person is sent to the electric chair or whatever the case might be. Not only does he kill the victim, the intended victim, but he kills the person he frames, and it's just it's a bonus. It's a bonus round for him, and he gets back to sit back and kind of chuckle, laugh, and say, "This is my doing," and kind of keeps it over the heads of the of law enforcement and of course the media and others. It's amazing as you point this out and as you very methodically go through the timeline in your book. And folks, once again, I've got to mention this book. It's quickly become one of my favorites for the summer reading. It's called It's Me, Edward Wade Edwards, the Serial Killer You Never Heard of. Ladies and gentlemen who are listening to this program, the faithful listeners will know that this will connect a lot of dots on the programs that we have. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, as you guys were talking, I apologize, I was reading some of his book, and this just struck out at me, the Chandra Levy killing. He was a witness in the killing, or in the trial of the alleged killer. Gave witness testimony.
Actually, he made it into the affidavit for the charging document as witness number 10, providing information through a letter that was used in the affidavit to charge Ingmar Gwandiki in 2009. But then at trial, that witness never was found and never did come forward because it didn't really exist. It was just false information provided to the prosecution that was used in the charging document, but then not used at trial because it was false. But Ingmar Gwandiki eventually went down for Chandra Levy's murder in 2009. And right now they're debating on whether or not to dismiss that verdict and give him a new trial because of the false testimony that was provided.
Very, very interesting. Wow. Chandra Levy, though, just to be clear, his motive there was directly related to her position, her being, well, her position with respect to, oh my goodness, name just popped out of my head, John Doe number one, not John Doe, but
Timothy McVeigh.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, she actually, there was a lot of reasons why he picked Chandra Levy. The number one reason being that she was from Modesto, which was the Bay Area where they executed that innocent man in 1957. And that was very important to Edwards. He targeted many, many, many girls from that area. She was also going to the University of California as a journalism student, which is who the Zodiac taunted his whole life, was the editors, the journalists. She was also a criminal justice major, and the Zodiac and Edwards taunted the police his whole life. And as an intern, she was put in charge of media relations for the pending execution of Timothy McVeigh, the world's most prolific, or at least the United States' most prolific killer. Edwards was the most prolific killer, and that's why he targeted her and took away all of McVeigh's recognition. If you remember correctly, Timothy McVeigh's execution went down pretty quietly in the media, June 11th, 2001, because Chandra Levy was all over the news.
That's
she
right.
was throughout the May, June, July, August until 9/11 struck. And then once 9/11 struck, 7 days later, he does the anthrax attacks because he's lost his recognition. And he holds on to Chandra Levy's body and doesn't plant it until May 22nd, 2002, and that's the day that her parents are on Oprah Winfrey begging for the release of their daughter. And boom, her head's found in Washington, D.C. Park. And
okay.
It starts it all over again.
I've got to ask you, as I was talking with this particular investigator, who, by the way, boy, I'd love to connect you guys together because I think you'd have a lot in common. We were sharing some of the information that's in your book, and of course, he was on your website, and we were looking together and talking and really getting into the mechanics of this whole. Well, this whole case, I mean, this whole crime scene, multiple crime scenes, but looking at this as one, we'll say one crime scene. The question came up, the numerology aspect, the dates, the significance, and you referenced this earlier in the conversation. For example, and I'll just give one example of what we had discussed. The number 216, which happens to be Cleveland, Ohio's area code, but there's more of there's more significance to the number 216, 216, however you want to say it. Have you gone? I'll use the phrase to the next level. Like, have you looked at this in more of a moving away from the forensics or just the admissions? Have you looked at this from an Aleister Crowley kind of point of view, or a OTO, Jack Parsons, more that kind of through that prism? Have you looked at it in that fashion?
Well, yeah, I had my friend Neil Best, who is an incredibly brilliant man who lives down the street here from me, who had studied Aleister Crowley, the Book of the Dead, ancient Egyptian history. He'd also lived in China, knows how to write and read Chinese, Greek, Old Norse. He's just a brilliant guy. And I really had no idea the extent of the satanicness of this case. And without Neil running me through how it all works, I wouldn't have been able to do this. It was really Neil's thought process on what Edward's thought process was. Those two actually clicked to the point where they became really good friends before Ed died. Spoke on the phone a lot, wrote a lot of letters between each other, and everything said was a clue to be followed. And the numerology in the case in itself is amazing. I'm not a mathematician, but I think anybody just going on my website and going through the timeline will see the connections between dates and locations and names and times and what he was able to put together. one or two little connections would be a coincidence. But it's just not a coincidence. It was all planned deliberately to play out like this. And in the end, on that blackdahliasolution.org website, everybody should go on that, because that also was the solution to his murder. And that told you how to figure out the puzzles. Just like his book was a puzzle, the website, blackdahliasolution.org, was also a puzzle. But it was his internet media puzzle put out there. It was a solution to the Black Dahlia case, which was 1947.
That's amazing. Okay. The dates, the numbers, and oftentimes when we talk about serial killers or killers with satanic motives, not only do we look at the methods, but we look also at the, as we were just talking about, the numerology, about the high satanic holidays, and all of this gets kind of put into this hopper, and looking at this, well, in different hoppers, I suppose, in different templates. And I just seem, as I was going through your book, I just, some dates jumped out at me, and time periods, and this goes back, I mean, we could even take this back into the Laurel Canyon days and the happenings there, with well, going with the Beatles' White Album and the Manson clan, and that whole mindset back there, not as a direct relation to what's going on, but certainly as an overlay. I mean, which brings me to my question in a long way, I suppose. Did Edward Wayne Edwards have any witting accomplices?
Or handlers, yeah.
Or handlers.
Well, if he had any accomplices in any of the murders that he did, then they most likely ended up dead. He flat told me that he never told anybody when he killed somebody. But I knew he had accomplices in his conspiracies, because Edward's murders always involved a conspiracy of some sort, that somehow he was going to gain money through this conspiracy. And so he would get people he would get a parent of a very wealthy company to say he would groom his way into the company, pretending to be somebody who's going to make that company some money, convince the owner of that company that their company is worth a lot of money, you should get this insurance, kidnapping insurance for your employees. That company would get that insurance, and then 2 years later, boom, he'd kidnap one of their employees and kill him and collect. He was able to collect money not only through insurance fraud, but by holding the bodies, wait for the reward to get up to a certain point for the return of the body, plant the body, collect the reward under assumed identity, and go to the next one. That's how diabolical and brilliant he was in his conspiracy. So a lot of people partook in his conspiracies thinking they were going to probably gain something financially or sexually or whatever it was. But in fact, it was just a conspiracy that when the murder happens, the evidence would point towards the person that put the insurance on him, the father who put the insurance on his son, and then his son gets kidnapped, and who becomes the suspect? The parent. That was a repeated theme of Ed Edwards. If he could set up a parent for the killing of their own child, he did it his whole life, and he would do it by making sure the evidence looked like it was an inside job.
My goodness. Again, the diabolical nature of what we're talking about here is just, it's almost beyond comprehension, but
yeah.
I mean, think about this.
And how many more people are there like this out there? I'm reading a lot of his letters, and he refers to, Satan and Oriasis and Ra, the sun god, Osiris. I'm sorry, and takes on so many different roles, as pretending to be different people on the internet forums, and putting pieces together. And sometimes, manufacturing them so they look as though they're together to frame people. I mean, the amount of evil here tells me that it's not just a man's mind behind this.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that have said that there are other conspirators out there. You know, there was one man for sure that Edwards really hooked up with for 40 years, and that man's name was Frank Dryman. And both Edwards and Frank Dryman were in Deer Lodge Prison together in 1956 to 59 here in Montana. And after Edwards got out on parole in 1967, Frank Dryman also got out of parole in 1969. And Dryman was from Vallejo. And Dryman is the person that Edwards tried to set up as the Zodiac killer for those 3 years. And after the Zodiac killing stopped, Frank Dryman ran away from parole in California and was never caught again until 2010. And I got to kind of partake in capturing him. And that was just another piece of the puzzle that was dropped in my lap working in Deer Lodge Prison that I had no idea the connection it would have. But Frank Dryman was also a satanic priest when he was arrested in 2010. He was living in Arizona running a wedding chapel, and he was just a satanic priest. And he had probably most likely been running around killing the whole 40 years he was on the run from parole, but never got caught until 2010. Now he's back in Deer Lodge Prison right now, and he's still alive.
Is he talking?
Yes, I actually interviewed Frank Dryman in 2011 in Deer Lodge Prison. This was pretty early on, and he gave me incredible information on the thought process of Ed Edwards and the satanic stuff that was going on in Deer Lodge Prison, which ended up, Frank Dryman had the Zodiac cryptograms tattooed on his body, and that's why Edwards used some of those symbols. Because Frank Dryman had him tattooed on his body, and he figured the police would definitely look at him. And they did, but Edwards had screwed up. His first Zodiac killing occurred December 20th, 1968, and Frank Dryman didn't get out of prison until January 7th, 1969. And so the setup didn't work. Dryman was in prison for the first Zodiac killing, so couldn't set him up for it. He spent his whole life trying to set somebody up for it. Arthur Lee Allen is pretty much the one the public has decided is the Zodiac killer, all because of the media. But there's just no doubt that it's Ed Edwards now. The site will name him.
Okay, and we have, John, we've got questions from Stacy Butler from Berks County, Pennsylvania, Raymond from Kansas City, Kansas, Francis from Saginaw, Michigan. We've got Norma from Raleigh, North Carolina, Shelley from Elkhorn, Nebraska, and also Cheryl from Wausau, Wisconsin, all after the break. Can you hang with us, because these people want number 3 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 28th day of July, 2014. Days are flying by as summer is coming to a close, if you can believe that. The next holiday being, Labor Day. Oh, isn't that just blow your mind or what? Folks, we have a very special guest tonight, Mr. John A. Cameron, or John Cameron, the author of the very compelling book, It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the serial killer you never heard of. I better tell you, folks, this book looks, I've just had it with me over the last 3.5 days. I'm going to tell you, I've got little post-its everywhere. I've got arrows going here and there. I don't mark books up. I use post-its that I can easily remove. So, but having said that, Mr. Cameron, welcome back, and thank you for staying with us for this program. Very interesting indeed. I've got a question here I want to slip in first because, Kim, God bless you. I know your mom wants to know about this, so I'm going to ask. And, John, we've got a regular listener whose mother listens to the program as well, and she says, Mom wants to know about the murder of John Benet Ramsey. What can you tell us about John Benet? What the heck happened there?
Yeah, the Joe Benet Ramsey case came into my investigation actually very quickly after we were able to determine that Edwards was the Zodiac killer. And the reason that came in so easily is course, the Zodiac killer sent letters his whole life that kind of had clues to his identity, and when he signed his letters, he signed them with the Zodiac cross and circle, signed by the cross. The JonBenet Ramsey note was a 3-page rambling parable that nobody really ever understood because it was never really a ransom note. It was actually a real story, a parable of the real killer's life. And it was the signature of that ransom note that was the most important clue that the Zodiac killer, Ed Edwards, had done it. And that signature was signed Victory T.C. Everybody has argued, does that mean? Well, victory is a Christian phrase. We all know that if we've been involved in the Catholic Church or in the Christian Church. But what does SBTC stand for? Well, it stood for signed by the cross, the Zodiac cross. That entire 3-page ransom note, Edwards had actually sent a 3-page puzzle in the Zodiac case, which he said, when solved, would contain his identity. And that 3-page puzzle was solved, but there were 18 characters left over that were never solved. But after we identified Ed Edwards, we did solve them, and it identified Ed Edwards as the Zodiac killer. And so the JonBenet Ramsey case, she was killed on Christmas Day, 1996. And 1996 was a very important year for Mr. Edwards because he had actually appeared in a HBO documentary in June of 1996 called Paradise Lost. And in that documentary, he is standing over the grave of the victims in the triple murder in West Memphis, Arkansas. And he managed to con his way into a camera shot on a documentary about his own murder the same year that he killed JonBenet Ramsey, 1996. And the reason he killed JonBenet is he had done the exact same crime 50 years earlier in 1946 in Chicago. When Edwards was just 12 years old, he had escaped Palmerdale Catholic Orphanage in Cleveland, Ohio, and he fled to Chicago. And on January 6, 1946, he befriended a little 6-year-old blonde girl in Chicago. Her father was in charge of the funding for Palmerdale Catholic Orphanage that Edwards had just lived through for 8 years and was completely destroyed in. So Edwards targeted that family to destroy their daughter because that man was in charge of the funding for his stay in Palmerdale. So he groomed his way into this little 6-year-old girl's life, played hopscotch with her the day before he killed her, and talked her into climbing out her bedroom window at night to go play with him. But what he actually did is he took her to the basement, dismembered her, beheaded her, then spread her remains throughout the sewers of Chicago in 1946 and taunted the police and press with letters and messages written in lipstick to catch me. Please stop me. I can't control myself. And that murder in 1946 ended up being a replica of the JonBenet murder he would do 50 years later, where he didn't lure JonBenet out of her house, but he lured himself into the house. Just before JonBenet Ramsey was killed, 3 days before, she had told one of her friend's mothers that she was getting a special visit on Christmas Day from Santa Claus. And the friend's mother straightened her out and said, no, JonBenet, Christmas Eve. He's going to see you on Christmas Eve. And JonBenet corrected the mother and said, no. My Santa Claus told me he's going to give me a special visit Christmas night. And that has always confused people. And that's exactly how Edwards got into that home that night. He had groomed his way into the pageants that JonBenet had been in Michigan, Atlanta, and Colorado. All 3 of those places were his major killing grounds throughout his life. And Patsy Ramsey and JonBenet Ramsey are both buried in Marietta, Georgia right now. And that is where Edwards was caught in 1982 wearing the police uniform when he was killing all the kids in the Atlanta child killings. So a lot of people had trouble with Ed Edwards being a child killer when in 2010 he's confessing to killing teens and adults. But he had actually been killing children since 1946. And JonBenet was a replica done on the 50-year anniversary of the same murder he did in 1946, and the ransom note in the 46 one was similar to the ransom note he wrote in the 96 one. And that really was an MO of Edwards, would be to kidnap a child, kill the child, leave a false ransom note that was a parable of who the real killer was as a clue, and deny the remains to the family. And in the Joe Monet case, he was 63 years old then. He didn't take her out of the house. He didn't need to, but he needed to take her to the basement just like he did. Bashed her head in, almost decapitated her, laid her out ritualistically, put a white blanket over her, stamped false blood patterns on her, and actually wiped false DNA on her inner leg. And that same year, he had the remains of the boy he had killed in 96 that he confessed to in 2010. He had them hidden. He had taken that boy's head. And so Edwards would take the remains of others, wipe DNA on his victims at other murders, and it would never tie back to him. And in the Joe Monet case, it was all staged to look like the killer had to have been within the family. And that's what happened, is the press went crazy against John and Patsy Ramsey in January of 1997 after a false letter was sent to the Boulder police from Shreveport, Louisiana by Edwards. And that letter directed the evidence to look at the family member because someone within the family was molesting Joe Monet. And that's exactly what it did. And the Ramseys got indicted 2 years later.
Yeah.
But the prosecutor would not file charges. And, you know, that out of all the cases that I've run across that Edwards did, that's the only prosecutor that used his sense and didn't charge those people. Because the evidence always looked like they must have done it. And that's always the way it was with Edwards. He would make sure that it would always look like they must have done it. But the people that knew these people knew they could have never done something like that. But all it takes is the right information, the press to be told, and then the public condemnation comes out, and you're crucified in the papers before you ever have a trial. And in the Joe Monet Ramsey case, to this day, there's people that say the most vile things about John and Patsy Ramsey, and all they were doing was planning to go to Michigan the next day with their beautiful daughter, and they woke up to that horrible thing. And it was all staged to do exactly that. And if you recall, the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, he was caught in Montana in 1996. He was a big serial killer from San Francisco that was suddenly getting a lot of recognition in the end of 96, and Edwards stole it away from him. And he was in the paper again with Joe Monet. And Timothy McVeigh trial was going on in Denver, Colorado. It was moved to that area in 96 and played out in the spring of 97. And that's another reason he targeted that area, because he wanted to steal the thunder from any other killer that was in the papers. And at that time, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was in the paper, and so was Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. And he stole it all away by killing Joe Monet. And we've talked about that case for 14, 15 years now, and it's just a shame what's happened there.
Well, aren't investigators trained, though, in cases like the Ramsey murder? Are investigators trained to look, obviously, at the family members first, look inward, look at the closest people closest to the victim first, and then work outward from there? Unless, of course, evidence points elsewhere. Well, especially in the 90s, because I think it was Casey Anthony. There was some other cases back in the early 90s that were big murders of parents killing their children, and the police not grilling the parents thoroughly enough. And as a police officer myself in the 90s, I had child killings where I had to grill the parents to try to clear them. And that's what you want to do. If they're not the ones, you want to clear them so you don't have to put them through this turmoil. But Edwards staged the crimes with such good evidence that pointed that it had to be them, that it was really hard for investigators to think, is there a person that is actually out there setting all this stuff up to look like this? You know, we didn't want to believe that was true, because if that's true, it destroys the whole system. And it's been true since 1945.
He set up his first person in 1946, and it's been true ever since then, that he's done it every decade. And so it's very disheartening to think there will be in the future the Ed Edwards defense. There are people in prison that will have an Ed Edwards defense in the future.
Meaning to say that they were set up.
They were set up, and it's time to look at the particulars. His cases are really obvious. You know, I studied a lot of murder during this investigation, and everybody was saying, well, you're connecting him to every murder in the United States. And I wasn't nearly connecting him to every murder in the United States. I have no idea how much murder there is in this country. But what there isn't a lot of are these bizarre ritualistic killings where people are in prison screaming, I was set up. And once I knew the MO, as the investigation played on, it became very easy to find them, because not only were they obviously ritualistic and he was there, but they're in his book. Yeah, he described details of some of the murders in his book that would always tie to his future murders. So it was really about being an out-of-the-box thinker, that there may possibly be a killer out there that his only MO is to kill and set others up. And then you had to look at your case from that angle.
Gotcha. Stacy from Berks County wrote to me and asked about the Masonic. Now, you had referenced, of course, the Osiris Mysteries and the Egyptian god Osiris and so on and so forth, and the Book of the Dead. And it's my understanding through your book that Ed Edwards was, in fact, a Mason. Is that correct?
Yes, he actually came out of Leavenworth Prison in 1967, and he was on parole, federal parole, until 1977. And he was allowed by his parole officer to travel the country and preach that he was rehabilitated. But he also got into the Masons in Akron, Ohio in 1968, and got in charge of the money. And, of course, stole it all.
Sure.
Yes, he would groom his way into those types of societies also, because to take from them. He was a robber, a burglar, a killer, a rapist. He was not just a serial killer. He was a criminal and a master at criminal. And the way to be good is to groom yourself into high, powerful people and then rip them off, whether it be to take their money or take their child. And the Masons allowed him to look like a respectable man in Akron, Ohio, preaching that he's a real rehabilitated criminal. And the whole time he's flying out to California, Florida, Michigan, New York. And he flew a lot of these places and stole cars and committed the murders, and then flew home. He hired private jets. He took buses, trains, stolen cars off car lot parking lots that he would then return, and nobody ever knew they were gone. He was just a master criminal. So not only did you have the serial killer aspect of it, but you had the master criminal aspect of it, which made him like no other. Most of them are driven by a sexual compulsion, and he wasn't. He was driven by the need to kill somebody and to set somebody up and watch the recognition play out.
Gotcha. Okay. And Stacy had referenced, of course, the Masonic aspect of things, wanting to know essentially about the Masonic influence. And I see in your book on page 337, you've got a photograph taken from the documentary, HBO documentary from 1993 of Ed Edwards' Paradise Lost that you referenced earlier, of him holding two $1 bills exposing the eye of Osiris in the Egyptian pyramid. Rather interesting, I thought, and it kind of dovetails with what Stacy had mentioned. So there, I don't want to force the satanic component, but we have to recognize that, I suppose.
No, and that what you're referring to is the Paradise Lost HBO documentary that was released in 1996, and just in an 8-minute chapter titled Christmas, which was very important also because 96 was the year he killed Joe Monet on Christmas. 96 is the year his HBO documentary comes out titled Christmas. And there he is, standing above the grave of the victim, just for a quick 10-second shot, holding that $1 bill with Osiris's eye and the Egyptian pyramid staring right into the camera. He's wearing a hat, a fake beard, and carrying a cane and wearing big glasses to kind of cover his face. And he just stares into the camera, puts the money in his wallet, and that's it. And it wouldn't make any sense to anybody watching that movie if you didn't realize that the man in that movie is the serial killer himself, standing in his own documentary of the killing he just did. And it's very satanic because the whole thing was based on Christmas, and the family is sitting there crying at the grave. And in the end of that scene, if you watch that scene on my coldcasecameron.com, I think it's dated June of 96, you'll see it on there. You will see that at the end of the segment called Christmas, the cameraman put a star on the father's forehead, a shadow of a star on the father's forehead. Yeah, I saw that. That was deliberately done. That was deliberately done. That was actually the wound that was on the boy's forehead, the victim's forehead. Edwards had used that cane as the weapon that he's holding in the documentary. But then on the bottom of the cane, a 4-pointed ferrule, which is for gripping ice or whatever. But by stamping the boys in the head with that ferrule, it caused a star-shaped pattern on their foreheads. And these boys had that pattern. And what it was a cross, put a circle around it with his cane, and he signed those boys by the cross, just like he did the Joe Monet Ramsey note, SBTC, signed by the cross. He stamped that star in their heads, and then that production company actually placed the shadow of that star on the father's head. That whole day, Edwards was trying to set up the father of the victim as being the real killer. And that's what that whole day was all about in 1993 when Edwards conned his way into that camera, was to try to set up the father. And he had got his way into that production company. You can see the credits of that whole documentary contain the zodiac sign throughout. All of the credits contain the zodiac sign and any of the O's in the names of the people. So he had injected himself through a minor production company that did some of the filming that day and got himself on his own murder mystery.
I hesitate to use the word brilliant, but in a way, there's that evil genius component that, emphasis on evil, I suppose. That's there. That's so evident. And once again, folks, I mean, connecting dots, the satanic influence, even what we're seeing today, people may ask, well, what does our topic today have to do with current events? Because we're a current event show. Well, it has everything to do with current events, especially if we know that with what Mr. Cameron's saying is what I hear him saying anyway, and what I've gleaned from the book here, is there is this demonic influence that really is present, and it's not just present on a microcosmic level, but a macrocosmic level. But I mean, would you agree with that? I suppose the assessment.
I have found myself saying to people when I'm talking about it, he was brilliant, or it's amazing what he did. And I don't mean to say that in any way to take anything away from what this man really did, because he was horrible. But he was brilliant, and he used it to commit evil. And the biggest satanic crime of all of the crimes that I came across was the 1980 crucifixion of a nun in a Catholic church in Toledo, Ohio, on Easter Saturday. And that case alone was the most disturbing. Edwards had actually conned his way into the church under the guise of he was a Catholic priest. And at 7:30 a.m. after Saturday morning, the nun, who was 81 years old, who usually opens the sacristy up, was attacked inside the sacristy, stabbed 31 times in the chest in the shape of an upside-down cross, was beat on the left side of the face a number of times satanically, was then spread out like the crucifix in the sacristy where the body of Christ is held on Good Saturday, and covered with a cloth. And the only person that could have done it was the priest that would have been there with her. And Edwards knew that. And the priest's name was Father Robinson, and he was up in his room getting ready for Mass when he walked into the sacristy and found her laid out, murdered. Everybody thought he did it. Everybody blamed him from 1980 all the way up until 2006. And finally, in 2006, they arrest him, charge him, convict him on court TV, and it was all televised live. And he went down for killing that nun, Father Gerald Robinson. And he just died July 4th of this year in Ohio prison. And I got to speak with him and speak to his attorneys, and he knew he was innocent all along. And his letter is in my book, and he's just a man of God who always felt that the truth would come out. But Edwards actually wrote about Mr. Robinson in his book, and so it was kind of a clue as to how Edwards' book worked. A man named Mr. Robinson is the one who forced him to go to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania when he was 15 years old, and he was a Catholic worker. And so Edwards decided to pick out a guy named Mr. Robinson, who was a Catholic priest in 1980, and set him up just so it would tie into his book, and it worked. And it was the most horrible crime you'll ever read about, but he actually did this type of a crime to 3 other women over his life of killing, crucifying them on Easter. That was very important.
Wow.
Easter, Christmas was always important to him.
And we know how the satanic crimes use Christian holidays as blood sacrifice days. Very interesting. And of course, you're referencing the April 6, 1980 murder of Sister Margaret Paul. And it's interesting, too, because you do point out that there were similar wounds. She had a broken neck bone, 31 stab wounds, 22 to the face, 9 in the shape of an inverted cross on her chest. My goodness. But many other victims that include Chandra Levy and John Bonet and others, of course, there were signature rabbit punches, as you put it, to the neck. All of this is tying together, folks. This is amazing.
Yeah, the rabbit punch is very important, because what Edwards talks about giving the rabbit punch on a video you can watch on my website on YouTube. And he talks about this punch. And what that punch is it shows you how close to his victims he always got. He'd be standing there talking to you as the nicest guy in the world, and the next thing you know, he's punching you right in the hyoid bone in your throat. And what that does is it breaks immediately, but you don't die. But you can't scream, and you can't breathe. And you're going to lie there, and you're going to go live through what he's about to do to you. And many of his victims had a broken hyoid bone. Chandra Levy, Lacey Peterson, Sister Margaret Powell, Joe Monet, they all did, because it was so quick. They didn't see it coming. And that's exactly how he describes it in the video. Nobody saw the rabbit punch coming, because nobody knew that the guy was Satan. As far as the victims knew, it was their best friend, and then all of a sudden he was Satan.
Well, okay. Raymond from Kansas City, Kansas wants to know if there were any. Is there any, and I'm going to condense this paragraph-long question into really just a single sentence. Is there any rhyme or reason, satanic rhyme or reason, satanic characteristics of the locations of the murders? For example, Toledo, Ohio, or Los Angeles, California, or wherever these murders were committed. Any satanic significance to the locations? How were they selected?
Yes, many times they would have to be near water, because that purifies after the killing. They would also be on places named, like in Great Falls, he killed on the Sun River, and then he took the girl onto the top of Mount Royal Road, both of those having some connection, the Sun River to the ancient Egyptian religion, the sun gods, and the Mount Royal Road being an Indian burial ground north of Great Falls here at the top of one of the largest hills overlooking the city. Many of his killings would occur at points where state lines are easy to cross. St. Louis, Missouri to Illinois, St. Louis being the gateway to the west, and also St. Louis, Missouri being where the Missouri River dumps in. And the Missouri River actually starts here in Montana where I live. So he always tied his murders into his previous murders, and he tried to leave satanic clues by where he left them and how he left them, especially if the victims were beat on the left side of the face or the left side of the body and not on the right. And that was an indication of the dark side, the left side. When he was killing virgins and people like Joe Ramsey, he would cover them in a white blanket, like he did to Sister Margaret Pell in 1980. Virgins, clean, there's so much satanic symbolism in all of his murders that I could go on for days with each one and talk about the symbolism.
Wow. All right. Francis from Jonesboro, Arkansas writes, if you had to guess, how many more murders did this man commit than you have already discovered?
Well, I kind of put it at an average if I really wanted to figure it out. And he did from 1955 to 56, and that's really the time frame I'm concentrating on, is because that's when he killed in my hometown, and that's what started this whole thing. So I really concentrated on that. The first year was 55, 56, and just in that short period of time, he did over a dozen people. So if you just multiply 66 times 12, he killed for 66 years, you come up with quite a number. It's going to be over 1,000. There's no doubt it's over 1,000, because Timothy McVeigh was at 168 in 2001, and Edwards was way beyond Timothy McVeigh by 2001, and that's why he, one-upped him. And then 9/11 happened, and that's 3,000 people. And so what does he do next? We'll never know the extent of what the anthrax did, I don't think. But we've been lied to by the FBI for the last 12 years about it. And 2 people went down for it that weren't guilty of it. We'll never know what that has done. Edwards had sons inside the military. He had a son that worked in Lockheed Martin. He had the highest government clearance. He had access to some of the most important information in the country. His count would have to be higher than the 9/11 terrorists. And that may be in a way of, we don't even know. The anthrax is a horrible thing, and that really was his goal there. He had to outdo them.
That actually gives me the shivers. As I have your book here to my left, I'm looking at the Zodiac Killer bomb cipher and thinking about all of the evil that is so pervasive in this one person's life, let alone how many others walking the streets today could very well have that same evil satanic influence. Shelley from Elkhorn, Nebraska writes this: given his, quote, catch me if you can, end quote, persona, do you have any type of suggestions or indications that he, meaning the killer, was close to or in any way associated with any celebrities, politicians, or people of renown?
All of the above. On my website, you'll see the photographs of him with celebrities and with people in the media, in the radio, and head of the United Nations, Secretary Under General of the head of the United Nations. He's photographed talking about how he's going to help crime in America in 1972. He really got off on getting into the highest positions in our government, standing right in front of them, and nobody really knew who he was, because he was never Edward Edwards whenever he was out. He was always under an assumed identity with false credentials, but he demanded to be called Wayne. And that's because his middle name was Wayne, And so regardless of whatever name he was using at the time, people always called him Wayne, and he would immediately react, and because it's his real name. So he was inside some of the highest positions, especially in the end. Fort Bragg in 2008, he got right into Fort Bragg, right into the Criminal Investigation Division of the U.S. Armed Services, done that his whole life, into FBI, into local police, into sheriff's departments, CIA, Congress, Hollywood, all of the things that we have been told for the last 6 decades. There is a lot of false that's been going on, and he perpetuated it. And the exposure of him is only going to be good, because there's been a lot of innocent people ruined and are still being ruined today by what this man did.
Kind of a false flag events, if you will, equating to today's false flag events. Wow. Okay. It's amazing. I've had 3 or 4 different people write me since we had discussed this. Perhaps we can touch upon this again. Wiley, this is for you, Bill, and others who have written asking this question as well. When referencing the anthrax attacks, and I know that you had gone over this and answered this, but for those who either missed it or joining us late, where did he or how did he get his hands on the material that was supposed to be so closely guarded by our government?
Well, we kind of learned just recently, if you've been reading the paper in the last week, you'll find out that the government hasn't been watching our anthrax, and they actually just fired the head of the biggest anthrax lab, and there's a big shakeup because they hadn't been watching it very closely. But the anthrax that was used in 2001 was stolen from Fort Detrick, and Dr. Ivins was the person that was responsible for the anthrax that was used. It was his anthrax that was used in those letters. Dr. Ivins became a suspect right away, but it just didn't make sense that he was capable of doing what was done in that case. And just the letters themselves in that case are pretty incredible, to Congress, to the media, the major medias, and all happening right after 9/11. Dr. Ivins was sexually deviant, and this is just factual, a lot of court records. He liked to cross-dress. He liked to drink. Edwards knew how to get into his victims by providing them their addiction, getting them to sin. And he was already in the U.S. Armed Services Division as a criminal investigator and had all the credentials. And I have him blogging from where the anthrax was stolen, before it was stolen. And what he was blogging was that he was Osiris, that the blog I read to you regarding Osiris, and he felt that he was collecting sinners in the afterlife and all of that. That was actually blogged from Fort Detrick, where the anthrax was stolen, and it was blogged in August of 2000, about 8 months before it was stolen. He had a plan with that anthrax, but 9/11 changed it. I don't know what his previous plan was, but after 9/11 he used it to gain the recognition. But I have my ideas of what he was going to do with the anthrax, but those are just my own thoughts.
Interesting. Wow. Folks, this is really, again, mind-blowing, and I'll tell you something, if you really want to get into this, and I do suggest that you do, because this is really an eye-opener. The book, John Cameron's book, It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards. If you go to coldcasecameron.com, you can buy the book there. It's very well worth the money. It's a hard copy book. It's over 300 it's about 400 pages with the index, and it's got a timeline. It's got the illustrations. It's fabulous. To me, this, when we talk about the larger in this country, across the world, and you look at something like this, the product of Detective Cameron's investigation and others associated with him, you can see how the cogs in this wheel of satanic, everything just kind of fits together, and it's really, it's engaging, to say the least. It's very compelling. Wow.
Yeah, when you investigate, I mean, we're being a private investigator and looking at different types of crimes, and you know, you never want to get fixed into an idea or belief without having actual evidence to back that up. But in this case, you know, when evidence is planted, provided, I mean, it's just to the audacity of somebody to commit killings and show up at funerals or show up as witnesses, and I mean, I can understand how it would be overlooked, but that just shows you the level of how evil this guy was. It's mind-boggling sitting here listening to all this.
Absolutely.
You know,
and Norm, go ahead, sir.
You know, to put it in a simpler context for a lot of your listeners to understand is what was the Zodiac and what is the Zodiac. You know, we all think it's a watch or it's a killer, but the Zodiac is really just history. And what Edwards was trying to expose is how low we've come, how dark we've come in society. And he perpetuated it through our darkest times, to the point where now we can turn on our TV and not pay for it and get it for free, and everything on TV after 6 o'clock at night has to do with murder. If you're getting free TV on ABC, NBC, CBS, there's not one show that isn't about murder, mayhem, or how horrible it is. And this man perpetuated that from 1945 right up through 2010 and still does it in his afterlife, because he created the murders, sold the murders, watched people go down for those murders. We've talked about them for decades. We now just turn on our TV and watch it like it's normal, but it's really not normal for us to be turning on our TVs at night and all that's on is murder and mayhem. That's what he wanted. And so he kind of succeeded, and we can change it. We can turn that around.
Exactly. And, of course, what we're witnessing, and at least I believe what we've, through this creature, is the chaos that has been brought forth. I want to get as many of these questions in before the end of the program as I can. Norman from Raleigh, North Carolina, wants to know if his ultimate goal was recognition, which obviously, you did point this out. Why not this post-mortem, here is the Bible of everything I've done type of revelation? Well, why didn't he leave like some sort of confession in the form of an autobiography, a true autobiography?
Yeah, that's what everybody has always said. Why didn't he just come up and say, hey, I'm the Zodiac, and I'm Joe Monet Killer, and I'm this and I'm that? But had he done that, it would be over. It would just be known, here he is, and then it would be done. But he knew that this was going to go on forever if he did it this way. And he did confess over and over and over again. But nobody would really listen because he was always standing in front. And the biggest confession is truly the blackdahliasolution.org in 2002, because that was the year he thought he was going to get caught. He thought for sure they would have him by 2002. And after he placed the confession, blackdahliasolution.org, and that connected all of the murders from 1945 all the way up until his capture together. And it told you how to put them together. Only it was done as a riddle, just like the Zodiac. And if you go on that website, you will be very disturbed reading it, but you will clearly see that Ed Edwards is the man. In fact, he's pictured with the Black Dahlia just before he killed her in a photo booth. So he did confess, but he confessed in a way that would make it live on forever and keep us guessing.
Folks, I mean, think of how profound that is. Not to glorify what he did, but just think about how profound that is. And thank you very much for the question from Raleigh, North Carolina. I just want to read this very quickly from chapter 35, the final decade of killing, where you said to Neil, Edwards planned to get caught on every one of the murders he committed since he was 11. That's why he wrote that message in lipstick on his first one, "Please stop me, I can't control myself," in Chicago, 1945. He does John Bonet 50 years later and still doesn't get caught. He planned all of them deliberately, patiently, and cold-bloodedly, like he said in his book. Sometimes it took decades to bring to fruition, but he would carry through. And the next paragraph, I think, is key, and then I'll stop where you write. He had a bigger plan on what he was exposing, John. He was the foreign faction fighting the unjust criminal justice system, even though he was the one making it unjust. He wanted to see the demise of the USA.
That's
wow.
it.
Wow.
Yeah, that is why he called himself the foreign faction also in the Joe Bonet Ramsey note. You know, that's always bothered everybody. Why would the writer of that ransom note call themselves a foreign faction? That's because they were inside trying to destruct us the whole time.
So everything that was good, he wanted to turn evil. Everything that was evil, he wanted to perpetuate.
Yep. Yes.
My goodness. Okay. We've got about 9 minutes left of the program, John, and we've dominated with questions and just kind of peppering you with all sorts of things and going in different directions. What haven't we covered that you think might be important that we should cover? I'll just turn it over to you.
Well, I think the most important thing about the release of the book is to get these innocent people out of prison. I thought it would be real easy once I showed the information to the prosecutors involved, and they would just release the prisoners, but that's not how it works. Many of these people have been convicted. Some of them actually pled guilty to avoid being executed and are now sitting stuck in prison without any contact from the outside world. And the prosecutors are immune from any type of prosecution themselves, and they have the information, and they're just sitting on it. It's been very frustrating the way that the justice system has reacted to this, and it's because the man was always within. And if he's exposed, there is a lot of messiness that is going to come in the future regarding court cases all over the country that this man committed and set people up. So if there's one thing that could come out of this book, it is to expose what he did. Let's stop destroying the John and Patsy Ramseys of the world, and let's look at cases in a different light. It's very probable that one man committed all these horrible killings because that one man was alive that whole time. He was in the cities where the murders occurred, and he didn't get caught till he was 76 years old. And in his confession on blackdahliasolution.org, he makes one statement underneath the frequently asked questions to the author. And I'd like to read just a little portion of that because it sums out how young he was when he started. And the question was asked of the author of blackdahliasolution.org. I am wondering what drew the author to this case. And Edwards answers, in January of 1947, I was 13 years old. I loved riddles and murder mysteries. I regularly listened to radio programs like Suspense, The Whistler, Lights Out, and Inner Sanctum, and I was an impressionable. He goes on to describe that he was in L.A. on the day that the Black Dahlia was murdered, and it really was this one answer in this one part of that website that tied to his book, Metamorphosis of a Criminal, because he had made the exact statement inside his book. And then that unraveled what Black Dahlia Solution was, that it was the Zodiac Killer and the killer of the Black Dahlia's confession to 66 years of murder. And when he says that he was 13 years old in 1947 and he loved riddles and murder mysteries, Ed Edwards was 13 years old in 1947. And when he lists the names of the movies he was watching, or these are radio programs actually, Suspense, The Whistler, and Lights Out, and Inner Sanctum, they're all based on murder and satanic killing and it's what he obsessed about from a very young age. And he always wanted to be caught, and that's why he wrote those messages, "Please stop me, I can't control myself." But he wanted to be challenged, and he never found that cop to challenge him. And frankly, if he had been alive and I had to do this, I couldn't have done it, because he would have made my life horrible if he was out. So I feel very sorry for any police officer that had a murder that this man did and investigated it, because he would have made your life hell.
I've got a couple of friends who I can just see nodding their heads right now as police officers. A couple of quick questions here I'll sneak in before we cut you loose. Sandy writes this, Sandy from Pennsylvania. What was his relationship with his children? How many children did he have, and what was his relationship with them?
He actually had 3 wives. He had a wife in 1955-56, and he had 1 child with her. He had another wife in 1960 that he aborted. And then he married Kay Edwards in 1968 and had 5 children with Kay and 11 grandchildren. And I've met 3 of the 5. They're wonderful Christian people. They were raised in the light. Edwards really was 2 people. His family were devout Christians, beautiful people, married police officers in the Air Force, Army, teachers, and then he had his evil side. They saw his evil side once in a while. They were abused. He stabbed his wife. He didn't let her go to the doctor. He treated her. He was that good at being a doctor himself. They lived through horrible things, but it was their dad, and they loved him, and they didn't know he was a killer until they were all in their 40s, and it's destroyed them.
Yeah, folks, and you think you've got a messed up family, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. What a surprise that would be. Well, Mr. Cameron, I just want to say thank you so very much, Detective Cameron. It's been such a pleasure.
Absolutely.
And to think bigger. And, of course, folks, please go to his website, coldcasecameron.com. Of course, it's linked off of HomelandSecurityUS.com as well as Hagmann and Hagmann.com. Tell people about that website as well. But definitely go to his website, purchase the book. You will not be sorry, for what you find in there is just so compelling, so riveting. So there's so many exhibits, and I got to tell you, out of all of the non-fictional crime books, real crime books I've read, this is perhaps one of the most earth-shattering books I've read. And I just want to thank you for writing it. Thank you for your time tonight, as well as the years that you put in investigating what you did. I just can't imagine the sleepless nights that you went through.
Well, thank you for having me on. And there was a lot of people here in Great Falls, Montana, that partook in this investigation, and it really was a combined effort of a lot of really people that came together just at the right time. It was all about timing and being on the right information. None of us were really big followers of any of these major cases. We were just normal people living in Great Falls and had it dropped in our lap. And it would be nice to have it out there and let people start getting free from prison.
You're muted, Dad.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. I just love to hit that button. I'm sorry, John. One final question. This from Ken, listening live in the patrol car right now, traveling in Kansas, wanting to know for police officers, detectives that are working any cold cases or to contact you, do it through your website. Is that the best way?
Yes, there's a contact button on my website, and there's a lot of information on there that they can look and see if he was in their area at the time. And there's a lot of information on there, but they feel free to call me or email me or contact me on Facebook. Understood.
And you do have a Facebook presence?
Yes.
And that's, okay, very good, accessible via coldcasecameron.com. John, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so very much for your gracious gift of time. We've learned so much, and I do hope you'll stop back again and we'll get more into it as we learn more on other aspects. But God bless you. Thank you, sir, for your
All
courage.
right. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, buddy. Thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Folks, so that'll do it for us tonight. What a great program. What a fantastic guest. Seriously. And people, look at the macro level of this. Look at the satanic macro aspect of this. Please, connect the dots. Connect the dots. John did it for you in his book, and that book is well worth it. With that, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow night, Steve Quayle, along with another gentleman talking about the super soldiers and biblical aspects of what we're seeing happen today with the killings, mass killings over in the Middle East. It's going to be an engaging program.
God bless each and every one of you guys for listening. And thank you, Dad, for setting up that interview. It was a great call. Fascinating show. God bless all you guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Stay safe.